Hey there, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I've put together a new collection of interesting stories, so whether you're here to relax, fall asleep, or just listen in the background, this should be a good one. Feel free to let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always interesting to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now, let's start with the first story. It is titled,
I was flying on a family trip with my son and Dill, but when we boarded the plane, the flight attendant whispered to me, "Pretend you're not feeling well and leave the plane." I thought it was a joke, but then she came back and said, "Please, I beg you." 20 minutes later, the afternoon light slanted through my study window, catching dust particles suspended in air that smelled of old paper and lemon furniture polish. I sat at my desk, grading history papers I'd kept for 15 years. Nostalgia, maybe. Or the stubborn hope that my teaching days still mattered. The house settled around me with its familiar creaks, and I'd almost forgotten I wasn't alone here anymore. Then I heard the front door open downstairs. I looked up, pen hovering over a student's essay about reconstruction. Christopher and Edith had been living here for 8 months, but they moved through these rooms like ghosts, barely acknowledging my existence. We'd exchanged polite nods in the kitchen, nothing more. Their sudden footsteps on the stairs made my shoulders tense. Edith appeared first in my doorway. Christopher behind her with his hands shoved deep in his pockets. His eyes found the bookshelf, the window, anywhere but my face. "Francis, we need to talk." Edith's voice dripped with artificial sweetness, the kind that precedes bad news or worse requests. I removed my reading glasses slowly, a small defensive gesture I'd perfected over 40 years of dealing with difficult students. "About what?" Christopher shifted his weight. "We've been thinking about family, about how we should spend more time together." "Quality time," Edith added, moving into the room uninvited. She perched on the arm of my reading chair like she owned it. "Before life gets too busy." "Before what exactly?" I kept my voice level, but my historian's mind was already cataloging inconsistencies. They had avoided me for months. "Why this sudden change?" "Just you know how it is." Edith waved her hand dismissively. "Christopher, tell him about Miami." My son finally met my eyes, and what I saw there was desperation poorly masked by forced enthusiasm. "Miami, Dad, remember when we went when I was 12? Let's recreate those memories. A whole week together, fully paid, our treat." I set down my pen carefully. "You hated that trip. Said it was boring. Wanted to come home early." Christopher's smile faltered. "I was a kid. I see things differently now." The silence stretched. I studied them both. My son, who'd once brought me dandelions and called me his hero, and this woman who'd somehow convinced him that his elderly father was just an obstacle taking up space. Something had shifted between us, but I couldn't pinpoint when exactly. Was it when Christopher lost his job? When their debts started piling up, or had it been gradual, a slow erosion of respect and love? "When would this trip be?" I asked. "Next week." Edith's response came too quickly. "Everything's arranged. We just need your yes." That evening, Edith insisted on cooking dinner. She never cooked. I sat at the dining room table while she moved around my kitchen with uncomfortable familiarity, opening cabinets, using my dishes. Christopher poured wine with excessive care, his hands trembling slightly when I asked about the trip's timeline. So, this was planned without consulting me. I accepted the wine glass, watching him over the rim. "We wanted it to be a surprise," Christopher said. "A good surprise." Edith set a plate before me, her movements calculated and precise. She'd worked in medical administration for years, and that clinical efficiency showed in everything she did. "Francis, your life insurance policy is quite substantial. 500,000, right? Very responsible planning on your part." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "How do you know the amount?" Christopher mentioned it once. She sat across from me, cutting her chicken into perfect uniform pieces. "Just conversation." I looked at my son. He was focused intently on his plate, refusing to meet my gaze. The mention of my insurance felt wrong, timed wrong, placed into casual dinner talk where it didn't belong. "I haven't been sleeping well lately," I said, testing them. "My heart feels strange sometimes, flutter-like." Christopher Unk's eyes lit up for a split second before he caught himself. "You should see a doctor." "Have you seen a doctor?" "Christopher worries too much." Edith cut him off smoothly. "You look fine, Francis. Probably just stress." They locked eyes then, just for a moment, but I caught it. Something passed between them, unspoken and knowing. My chest tightened, but not from any heart condition. After dinner, while they retreated to their bedroom downstairs, I found printed flight confirmations on the table, already booked, my ticket already purchased for next Tuesday. They'd been certain I'd agree, so certain they'd made irreversible plans. I sat alone in my study long after midnight, holding an old photograph of Christopher at age 7, gap-toothed and grinning, hugging my neck like I was the safest place in the world. That boy had become this man downstairs, plotting something I couldn't quite name, but felt in my bones. 40 years teaching history had taught me one thing. People leave evidence. Always. Patterns emerge. Motivations become clear when you step back and observe the whole picture, not just isolated incidents, the sudden generosity, the insurance comment, those synchronized glances, the pre-purchase tickets. Morning came with pale light and the decision I'd already made in darkness. I would go to Miami. I would watch them carefully. I would gather evidence the way I'd taught my students to examine primary sources with skepticism and attention to detail. Christopher knocked on my door at 7 o'clock, his smile too bright for the early hour. "So, Dad, Miami, what do you say?" "I'll go," I told him, watching his face. Relief flooded his features, followed by something else I couldn't quite identify. Satisfaction, anticipation. "Great. That's wonderful." He gripped the doorframe. "You won't regret it." Edith appeared behind him, her nod almost imperceptible. They'd won this round, or thought they had. I spent that morning packing my suitcase with methodical care. Underwear, shirts, my medication bottles. I paused over those bottles, reading the labels as Edith's words echoed in my mind. Something about health, about my appearance, about not worrying. My hands moved almost on their own, placing the medications in my carry-on instead of the checked luggage. A small act of caution, nothing more. But my training had taught me that survival often depended on small acts, minor precautions that seemed paranoid until they saved her life. The suitcase closed with a decisive click. Miami awaited, and whatever they had planned, I'd be ready. Christopher's car smelled of stale coffee and synthetic air freshener. I sat in the passenger seat with my suitcase balanced on my lap because he'd claimed the trunk was too full, though I'd seen it was nearly empty when he'd opened it. The weight pressed against my thighs as we merged onto the highway toward Orlando International Airport. Neither of them spoke. Christopher gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. Edith stared out her window, phone in hand, typing rapidly and deleting messages immediately after sending them. I watched her reflection in the side mirror. Her face held that clinical blankness I'd come to recognize as her thinking expression, calculating variables and probabilities. "Excited about Miami, Dad?" Christopher's voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Should I be?" He missed the implication entirely. "Of course. Family time, beaches, relaxation." "Relaxation, right?" The silence resumed, heavier now. I watched familiar Orlando streets slide past. The strip mall where I bought Christopher his first bicycle. The library where I'd spent countless Saturdays. The high school where I'd shaped young minds for 3 decades. Each block increased the pressure in my chest, the sense that I was being carried towards something irreversible. The airport appeared ahead, all concrete and glass and controlled chaos. Christopher parked in short term, another oddity. We'd be gone a week, yet he chose the most expensive option. Small details, but they accumulated like evidence in a case I was building against my own family. Security checkpoint arrived too quickly. Edith insisted I go through first. Her hand firm on my shoulder, guiding me forward. I placed my carry-on on the conveyor belt, watching her watch the screen as my belongings passed through. She leaned forward slightly, checking something, then relaxed when the bag emerged on the other side. "See, easy," she said, but her relief seemed disproportionate to the simple act of airport security. At the gate, Christopher and Edith boarded immediately with Zone 1, while my ticket relegated me to Zone 3. They disappeared down the jetway without looking back, leaving me standing among strangers, my suitcase handle digging into my palm. When my zone was finally called, I walked slowly, aware of the finality of each step. The jetway stretched ahead, that peculiar liminal space between solid ground and metal tubes suspended in nothing. The aircraft door yawned open, recycled air washing over me, carrying that distinct airplane smell of cleaning chemicals and thousands of previous passengers. I stepped inside, searching for my seat number, when a flight attendant approached. Her name tag read Mildred, and her face held professional pleasantness until she leaned close, pretending to check my boarding pass. "Pretend you're feeling ill and leave this aircraft." The words came out as an urgent whisper, her breath warm against my ear. I froze, hand tightening on my carry-on. "Excuse me, I don't understand." But she'd already moved away, tending to overhead bins and smiling at other passengers. I stood in the aisle, confused, looking between her retreating form and Christopher and Edith in their seats 3 rows ahead. They hadn't noticed the exchange, too focused on their phones. Was this a joke? Some bizarre safety protocol? I took another step toward my row when Mildred returned, her professional mask cracking. Her hands trembled as she touched my elbow. "Sir, I'm begging you. You need to get off this plane now." I looked into her eyes then and saw genuine terror. Not concern, not confusion. Terror. The kind that comes from knowing something specific and horrible. My decades of reading students' faces, of distinguishing truth from lies, kicked in. This woman was serious. "You're serious," I said quietly. "I've never been more serious in my life." Her fingers dug into my sleeve. "Please trust me, Dad. Everything okay?" Christopher's voice carried down the aisle, sharp with something that wasn't quite concern. I made the decision in a heartbeat, operating on pure instinct. My hand moved to my chest, fingers splaying over my shirt. My chest. The words came out strangled, convincing because the fear was real, even if the symptom was manufactured. I stumbled, dropping to one knee in the narrow aisle. The performance came naturally, aided by the genuine terror coursing through my veins. Immediate reaction. Flight crew surrounded me, voices overlapping in professional crisis mode. "Sir, can you breathe? Sir, stay with us." Hands under my arms, lifting, supporting. A wheelchair was called. I let them help me, but kept my eyes sharp, observant. The sick old man act didn't extend to my awareness. Through the commotion, I caught Christopher and Edith's faces. That's what I remember most clearly. Not concern, not worry, but disappointment. Pure, undisguised disappointment before their masks slammed back into place, and they performed concern for the audience around them. Christopher stood from his seat, the movement aggressive before he softened it, making himself the worried son. "Dad, what's wrong? Should we come with you?" No, stay seated, everyone." A crew member blocked the aisle. "We'll take care of him. Medical personnel are standing by." As they wheeled me backward down the jetway, I heard Edith's voice, low and meant only for Christopher, but carrying just enough in the quiet after crisis. "This ruins everything." Christopher's hissed response. "Not here. Not now." The wheelchair carried me back through the jetway, back into the terminal, back to solid ground. My phone buzzed in my pocket as they settled me in the medical area. A text from Christopher. "Dad, hope you feel better. We'll call when we land." I watched through the window as the aircraft pushed back from the gate as it began its slow taxi toward the runway. Christopher and Edith were aboard that plane, growing smaller and more distant with each passing second. The physical separation felt absolute, like I'd crossed some invisible threshold and could never return to the innocence of not knowing. The plane disappeared from view, just another metal speck against blue sky. "Mr. Wilson." I turned. Mildred stood there, still in her uniform, but off duty now, her face pale and drawn. She glanced around the medical area, checking for listeners. "We need to talk," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "Now, somewhere private." The medical room was small and windowless, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead with that persistent electrical hum that sets teeth on edge. A paramedic had just cleared me. "Vitals are fine, probably anxiety," and left me alone on the examination table, paper crinkling beneath me every time I shifted. Through the narrow window in the door, I could see the tail of my flight disappearing into clouds, carrying my son and daughter-in-law toward Miami while I sat here in this sterile room, heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with medical issues. My phone buzzed. Christopher's third text. "Dad, please respond. We're worried sick." I powered it off. The door opened. Mildred entered, still in her uniform, but her professional composure had cracked like old porcelain. She closed the door firmly, checked the hallway through the window once, then turned to face me. Her hands shook. "I need to show you something." Her voice trembled. "What I'm about to do could cost me my job, but I can't let this happen." I straightened on the table, paper rustling. "Show me." She pulled out her phone with fingers that couldn't quite stay steady, unlocked it, navigated to her video library. I recorded part of her phone call in the restroom before boarding. She paused, meeting my eyes. "Your daughter-in-law's call." The phone screen showed a bathroom stall, mostly ceiling tiles and fluorescent lighting. The audio was muffled, but voices carried through the echo of tile and porcelain. Edith's voice unmistakable in its clinical precision. "The pills will dissolve quickly in his drink. He won't taste anything." A pause. "Altitude makes heart attacks more plausible. Emergency at 30,000 feet, medical response limited. Investigation harder." Another pause. Then 500,000. Christopher's nervous but committed. She laughed. Actually laughed. I watched the video once, twice, 3 times. Each viewing revealed new layers of horror. My daughter-in-law discussing my death like a business transaction, weighing logistics and timing, calculating profit margins on my life. Who was she talking to? My voice came out steady, surprisingly so. I don't know. Mildred lowered the phone, but she mentioned the plan being in motion and Christopher being on board. Those were her exact words. I looked at her directly. Why did you do this? Risk your career for a stranger? Something flickered across her face. Old pain, barely healed wounds. My father, 3 years ago, his nephew convinced him to change his will. Then he fell downstairs. They ruled it an accident. Her jaw tightened. I couldn't prove anything. The regret has eaten at me ever since. When I heard that conversation, heard her plotting, I couldn't stay silent again. I'm sorry about your father. Don't be sorry. Her voice hardened. Stop them. I took her contact information in my small notebook, the one I always carried out of teacher habit. Precise, careful letters. Even in crisis, documentation instinct prevailed. We exchanged phone numbers. She promised to preserve the recording, understood it might become legal evidence. We shook hands. Her grip was firm despite the trembling. And she left to catch her next flight rotation. The taxi ride home took 40 minutes through Orlando suburbs, past strip malls and chain restaurants and residential developments that all looked identical. The driver tried making conversation. Missed your flight? No. I stared out the window. I caught something more important. He fell silent, confused, but sensing I didn't want to elaborate. My house appeared ahead. 2-story colonial with the garden I'd maintained for 30 years. Christopher's car wasn't in the driveway. They were in Miami, wondering why their plan had failed, scrambling to adjust. I paid the driver, walked up the path, unlocked my own front door. The house felt different now, violated, knowing what had been plotted within these walls, discussed at my own dining table, planned in bedrooms down the hall. I set my carry-on by the stairs, and went straight to my study. The filing cabinet held decades of documentation, insurance policies, bank statements, legal papers, property deeds. I spread everything across the dining room table, creating a systematic layout, chronological order, categorized by type. Teacher's methodology applied to my own survival. Hours passed. The light outside faded to dusk, then darkness. I put on my reading glasses, examined each document under good lighting, looking for inconsistencies. Signs of tampering, evidence of the conspiracy Mildred had exposed. I found it. The life insurance beneficiary form dated 6 months ago. Changing primary beneficiary from my niece in Atlanta to Christopher Wilson. The signature at the bottom attempted to mimic my handwriting but failed. The capital F in Francis was wrong, too elaborate. I never made that flourish. I photographed the document with my phone. Evidence preservation. More digging revealed additional horrors. Bank account statements showing transfers I'd never authorized. $38,000 over 6 months siphoned in amount small enough to escape casual notice. A power of attorney document granting Christopher financial authority signed with my forged name. Medical records I'd never seen. Documenting cognitive decline I'd never experienced. They had been building a paper trail of my incompetence while I taught night classes at the community center, graded papers, lived my normal life, creating the fiction of a failing mind to justify their control, to explain away my death as natural consequence of deteriorating health. Evidence, timeline, motive, method. I spoke aloud to the empty room, old teaching habit resurfacing. They planned this for months. Living in my house, eating my food, plotting my murder. I held up the forged power of attorney, staring at the signature that wasn't mine. This wasn't impulsive. This was systematic, planned, sophisticated. They'd researched, prepared, established legal groundwork for theft and murder, both. The documents remained spread across my dining table. I didn't clean them up. Couldn't. They represented physical proof of betrayal, tangible evidence of how thoroughly I'd been deceived. I sat in my reading chair as midnight approached, the house silent around me. My son was in Miami, probably reassuring Edith that they'd find another opportunity, another method. They didn't know I had the recording. Didn't know I'd found their forged documents. Didn't know the prey had become aware of the hunters. My hands rested on the chair arms, steady now. The shock had burned away, replaced by something colder, more focused. They didn't just try to kill me. They'd been stealing my life piece by piece for months, erasing my autonomy, building toward my erasure. Time to take it back. 3 days had passed since I discovered the forged documents. 3 days of avoiding Christopher and Edith's concerned questions, deflecting their attention with vague mentions of stomach trouble from the airport incident. 3 days of research, reading attorney reviews, making discreet calls, organizing evidence into color-coded folders that now sat on my desk in neat stacks. Nicholas Clark arrived precisely at 2 o'clock as scheduled. Mid-50s, gray threading through his dark hair, expensive briefcase that spoke of successful practice. A state law specialist with 20 years' experience. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp, and assessing. "Mr. Wilson, thank you for trusting me with this." He settled into the chair across from my desk, opened his briefcase, pulled out a laptop and legal pad. "Walk me through what you found." I slid the first folder across the desk. Blue tab, financial documents. Nicholas's professional composure held through the first few pages, then began cracking as the scope revealed itself. Forged signatures, altered beneficiaries, fraudulent power of attorney. His fingers moved faster, flipping pages, cross-referencing dates, building timeline. "When did you last review these documents personally?" His pen hovered over legal pad. "The insurance policy 5 years ago when I retired from teaching." "And you never authorized any beneficiary changes?" "Never." My voice was steady, firm. "That policy was meant for my niece in Atlanta. She put herself through nursing school. I wanted her to have something." Nicholas made notes, his writing quick and precise. "Your daughter-in-law, Edith Wilson. What's her professional background?" "Medical administrator. Silver Palms Medical Center. Administrative access to patient records, document templates, physician's signature stamps." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "She created your medical history. Made you incompetent on paper." While I was teaching night classes at the community center twice a week, I almost smiled at the irony, lecturing on civil rights history while being declared cognitively declined in fraudulent medical reports. Nicholas opened his laptop, began running forensic accounting software on my bank records. I'd provided account access authorization earlier. Red flags appeared immediately on the screen, highlighted in crimson. Unauthorized transfers, signature discrepancies, pattern matching typical fraud indicators. His expression grew grimmer with each discovery. $38,000 over 6 months, he said quietly. Systematic theft. Small amounts initially, then growing bolder. Classic embezzlement pattern. I reached into my desk drawer, pulled out Christopher's laptop. He left this in his room. I know his passwords. Set up the computer for him years ago. He never changed them. Nicholas glanced up, something flickering in his expression, understanding perhaps of the ethical line I'd crossed. But he took the laptop, connected an external drive, began data recovery procedures. Within minutes, deleted emails resurrected themselves on the screen. The conspiracy unfolded in digital form. Email chains between Christopher and someone calling himself a medical consultant. Discussion of substances causing heart failure. Untraceable and standard autopsy, particularly effective at high altitude. Prices negotiated. $10,000 for consultation and supply. Meeting arranged at a parking garage in downtown Orlando. Nicholas's jaw tightened as he read. This is a murder contract. Your son negotiated your death like he was buying a used car. The words should have hurt more than they did, but I'd burned through pain during those 3 days of documentation, reached a colder place beyond conventional grief. Keep reading, I said. There's more. He found the draft will on Christopher's desktop. Everything left to Christopher and Edith Wilson. My signature forged at the bottom, dated 2 weeks ago. They'd planned to discover it after my death, present it to probate court, claim I'd changed my mind about my niece. Nicholas leaned back, removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes. When he looked at me again, his professional mask had dropped entirely. Francis, may I call you Francis? I nodded. This goes beyond estate fraud. This is conspiracy to commit murder, forgery, elder abuse, financial exploitation, criminal charges, not just civil recovery. He paused. We need to decide. Bring in police now or build an ironclad case first. My phone buzzed on the desk between us. Christopher's text lit up the screen. Dad, where are you? We need to talk about your health. Nicholas glanced at the phone, then at me. Understanding passed between us wordlessly. The manipulation continued even now. Pressure applied to keep me confused and compliant. Build the case first, I said. Make it undeniable, then we strike. He nodded slowly. Respect evident in his expression. You've thought about this. I taught strategy through history for 40 years. Sun Tzu, Machiavelli, Napoleon. I learned from the best. I met his eyes. Know your enemy. Choose your battlefield. They're going to realize, Nicholas warned. When I file protective orders, block accounts, revoke fraudulent documents, they'll know. Good. My hands rested flat on the desk, steady and calm. Let them panic. Panicked people make mistakes. A slight smile crossed his face. All right, then. Here's what we do. He spent the next hour outlining strategy, calls to contacts, document examiner for signature analysis, forensic accountant for detailed audit, private investigator for background on the medical consultant. He photographed evidence with high-resolution camera, created digital backups, uploaded everything to encrypted cloud storage. 3 evidence packets, he explained, printing documents and organizing them into folders. 1 for eventual police involvement, 1 for civil proceedings, 1 for you to keep secure off-site. Safe deposit box, not your house. I nodded, absorbing everything. Student mode engaged, learning the machinery of legal warfare. As afternoon faded toward evening, Nicholas gathered his materials, packed his briefcase with methodical care. At my study door. He paused and turned back. Francis, 1 question. When this is over, what do you want? Justice or revenge? I didn't hesitate. I want them to understand what they've done. I want consequences that last. He considered this, then nodded. Don't change anything yet. Act normal. I'll handle protective orders. Account freezes through legal channels. Give me 1 week. After he left, I sat in the darkening study, listening to the house settle around me. My phone buzzed again. Christopher, Dad, dinner tonight? We need to talk about your future. I stared at the text, then typed my response. Yes, we need to talk about the future. The double meaning was clear to me, opaque to him. The hunter had become the hunted, though he didn't know it yet. I pressed send. 1 week had passed since Nicholas Clark left my study with his briefcase full of evidence and his timeline for legal strikes. 7 days of performance of playing the confused old man while executing strategy with the precision I'd once applied to lesson planning. I sat at my breakfast table, coffee growing cold in its mug, watching Christopher and Edith through the kitchen doorway. They had just returned from work, Christopher's tie loosened, Edith's professional mask firmly in place. Neither of them knew that while I'd shuffled around the house asking which pills to take and where I'd left my reading glasses, I'd been methodically destroying the foundation of their conspiracy. Dad? Christopher appeared in the doorway. You okay? You've been staring at that coffee for 10 minutes. I blinked slowly, perfecting the vacant look. Have I? I was just thinking about something. What was I thinking about? I shook my head, confused. It's gone now. The glance they exchanged was triumphant. I watched it happen. Watched them see what they wanted to see. Deterioration, decline, the mental incompetence their forged documents claimed. What they didn't see was the security camera above the refrigerator recording every micro-expression, every satisfied smirk. The cameras had been installed 3 days ago, 12 of them throughout the house. I'd called a legitimate security company, explained I'd been forgetting to lock doors and worried about break-ins. Christopher and Edith had approved enthusiastically. For your safety, Dad, Christopher had said. That's really smart thinking. They hadn't examined the specifications closely. Hadn't realized the cameras recorded audio. Hadn't understood that every private conversation, every whispered plan, every moment they thought themselves alone was being captured and uploaded to cloud storage that only I could access. The technician had been thorough 24/7 recording, sir. Complete coverage. Even sound. Even sound, I'd repeated, playing up the elderly confusion. Audio on all cameras. Yes, sir. Crystal clear. Christopher had interjected then, concern crossing his face. Dad, isn't that expensive? My safety is worth it. I'd waved dismissively. I've been so forgetful lately. Can't be too careful. That night, I'd added my own enhancement. A small audio recorder tucked into the heating vent above the dining room. The same spot where I had once caught students cheating during exams. Placing a microphone to record their whispered answers. Old teacher trick, new application. The recorder had paid dividends immediately. Christopher and Edith had their most candid conversations late at night in that room, believing themselves private. I'd listened through my headphones, documenting everything. The plane was supposed to work. Edith had hissed 2 nights ago, frustration cutting through her usual control. Now we're back to square one. You said the pills were undetectable. Christopher had shot back. You said I said a lot of things. Now we need plan B, the incompetency route. What if he resists? He won't. Look at him lately. He's already halfway there. I'd recorded it all. My face expressionless in the darkness of my room above them. Evidence accumulating digital and damning. But the most dangerous work happened in the deep hours when Christopher slept. His laptop lived on his desk, often left open or barely closed. I'd learned enough from teaching digital literacy classes to navigate file systems, copy drives, recover deleted data. The external hard drive I'd purchased stayed hidden in my study, filling with evidence each night I dared to enter his room. The close call had come 2 nights ago. Progress bar at 88%, my fingers hovering over the disconnect button when I had heard footsteps in the hallway. I had yanked the drive free, pocketed it, slipped through the bathroom that connected Christopher's room to the main hallway. My heart had hammered against my ribs, but my hands had remained steady. Decades of maintaining composure in front of challenging students had trained me well. Nicholas and I had met that afternoon in his office, reviewing the copied files, email chains about obtaining substances, browser history, researching untraceable poisons, spreadsheet calculations of my net worth, insurance payouts, asset liquidation timelines. Premeditation, Nicholas had said, his voice flat with professional assessment, not impulsive acts, systematic planning over months. Good, I'd replied. I want them to understand this isn't simple fraud. This is attempted murder. The legal machinery had already begun moving. Nicholas had filed protective orders, account freezes, power of attorney revocations, all with carefully delayed notification dates. Christopher and Edith wouldn't discover the blocks until they next attempted transfers. They won't know until they try to access funds, Nicholas had explained. Then panic. Panicked people make exploitable mistakes. Yesterday, I'd completed the most important task, creating a legitimate new will. Florence Harris, the notary, had been thorough to the point of redundancy. She'd read the entire document aloud, confirmed I understood each provision, recorded a video statement of my intentions. Your son won't inherit? She'd asked directly, her experienced eyes searching my face. My son plotted to murder me for inheritance, I had replied, clear-eyed and certain. He'll get exactly what he deserves, nothing. Everything goes to the Educational Futures Foundation. Scholarships for students who actually value education. She'd nodded, adding extra documentation layers, fingerprints, capacity assessment, multiple witnesses. I've seen this pattern before, she'd said quietly. Family members who see elderly relatives as obstacles rather than people. Now sitting at my breakfast table, performing confusion over which pills to take, I felt the trap tightening around them. Edith approached, her voice dripping false concern. The blue pills, Francis, for your heart. Here, let me help. Thank you, dear. I accepted the pills gratefully, swallowed them while she watched. I don't know what I'd do without you both. The camera above us recorded her satisfied expression, Christopher's approving nod from the doorway. Evidence of their performance, their manipulation, their growing confidence that I was exactly as incompetent as their fraudulent documents claimed. That evening, Nicholas had handed me a burner phone in a parking garage. Neutral location, no cameras, no witnesses. If emergency, he'd said, if they escalate to physical danger, call this number. Police are briefed, ready to respond immediately. I had pocketed it, hoping I wouldn't need it, knowing I might. Late that night, I sat in my study reviewing footage from the day's cameras. On screen, Christopher and Edith in the living room, their voices clear through the audio feed. We need power of attorney for his medical decisions, Edith was saying. Find a doctor who will declare him incompetent. Then we control everything, finances, healthcare, end-of-life decisions. Christopher's face showed no remorse, only calculation. My son had become someone I didn't recognize, or perhaps someone I'd refused to see clearly until survival demanded honest vision. I closed the laptop, picked up my phone, dialed Nicholas's number. They're accelerating, I said when he answered. Moving toward forced incompetency evaluation. We need to trigger the account freeze now. Agreed, Nicholas replied. I'll activate tomorrow morning. Be ready for their reaction. After hanging up, I opened my old teaching journal, leather-bound, pages filled with decades of classroom observations and educational philosophy. I wrote carefully. Lesson for today. Sun Tzu was right. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. But sometimes you must let them destroy themselves. Tomorrow they discover what happens when you underestimate the teacher. I closed the journal and went to bed, sleeping soundly for the first time in weeks. Morning arrived with pale sunlight and the sound of Christopher's computer chiming upstairs. Incoming email. I sat at the breakfast table. Newspaper spread before me like a prop. Listening intently to the house. Sounds I'd learned over 40 years of living here. Footsteps rapid. Christopher's voice sharp with alarm. Edith, get up here now. I sip my coffee slowly, counting to 60 in my head. Teacher habit. Wait before reacting. Let the situation develop. Upstairs, urgent voices overlapped. Words indistinct but tone unmistakable. Panic. At 60, I called up the stairs. Everything all right? Silence, then Christopher's forced calm. Fine, Dad. Just work stuff. The lie was obvious to everyone. I returned to my newspaper, not reading, just waiting. Throughout the morning, Christopher attempted to access accounts from his home computer. I observed from the hallway unnoticed. Phone camera recording as error messages multiplied on his screen. Access denied. Account locked. Please visit branch in person. His fingers trembled on the keyboard, trying different passwords, different access routes. Each attempt failed. Edith watched over his shoulder, her jaw tight. Call the bank. He did. I heard his side of the conversation. Increasingly desperate explanations about power of attorney, account management agreements, legal authorization. The bank's response must have been unequivocal because Christopher's face went ashen. They say the account holder must appear in person, he said flatly. All third-party authorizations suspended pending fraud investigation. For lunch, I made sandwiches. Unusual behavior that neither commented on. Too absorbed in their crisis. They ate mechanically, phones out, texting people I couldn't identify, lawyers probably, or the mysterious medical consultant from the email chains I'd copied. Dinner, I decided, required something special. I spent the afternoon in the kitchen preparing pot roast the way I'd learned decades ago. Muscle memory from years of cooking for myself after retirement, from the life I'd built that they intended to erase for profit. When they arrived home that evening, I heard them whispering urgently in the hallway before entering. I called them to the table, served food with practiced ease. The domesticity made the conversation more surreal. Strange thing happened today, I said conversationally, cutting meat into precise pieces. Bank called about unusual activity on my accounts. Apparently, someone's been making unauthorized transfers. I looked up, met their eyes. I asked them to investigate thoroughly. Christopher choked slightly on his water. Edith's fork paused mid-air, trembling almost imperceptibly before she forced herself to continue eating. Dad, Christopher began. About that, if you were just helping me manage money like you said, I interrupted gently. The bank will sort it out. Unless, I let the pause extend. There's something you need to tell me. Edith's mask slipped, her voice sharpened, professional control cracking at the edges. Francis, you're clearly confused about your finances. This is exactly why you need our help. Why you need oversight. Oversight? I repeated the word slowly. Interesting choice. Legal oversight? She pushed harder. Medical oversight. For your own protection. Protection from what? I asked mildly. From whom? The silence that followed was its own answer. Christopher stared at his plate. Edith's knuckles whitened around her fork. My phone rang. Nicholas, as planned, I answered, keeping my expression neutral. Oh, the bank. Yes, I'll come by tomorrow. Investigation, of course. Whatever's needed to protect my accounts. I watched their faces drain of color as I spoke. Unauthorized access is a serious matter. I appreciate them taking it seriously. After dinner, Christopher approached as I washed dishes. Dad, about tomorrow, maybe I should go with you. Help explain the account management we've been doing. I smiled gently, drying a plate with methodical care. That's thoughtful, but I should handle my own finances. I'm not incompetent yet. The word hung in the air. Incompetent. Christopher froze, searching my face. Had I emphasized it deliberately? Did I know about their plans? How much did I understand? I turned back to the dishes, leaving him suspended in uncertainty. Late that night, I lay awake in my bedroom. Phone on the nightstand displaying the security feed. Christopher and Edith sat in the living room below, their argument clear through the audio. This is your fault, Edith's voice cut like surgical steel. Your sloppy forgeries, your weak stomach for the original plan. The power of attorney was perfect, Christopher started. Obviously not since we're locked out of everything. She stood pacing. The camera followed her movement. We moved to plan B immediately. Incompetency evaluation. I know people at Silver Palms who need money, who owe favors. We get him declared unfit, become his guardians, control everything, including whether this investigation continues. What doctor would cooperate, not cooperate, interpret findings favorably? There's a difference. Her voice dropped, became calculating. I'll arrange it tomorrow. I recorded everything. Timestamps preserved. Evidence accumulating like compound interest. Slow at first, then exponentially damning. Morning brought the promised phone call. Dr. Morrison claimed to be my family physician, which was interesting since I didn't have a family physician. I used the walk-in clinic near the library for occasional needs. Routine cognitive assessment, the pleasant voice explained. Just a standard evaluation this afternoon at 2. Of course, I agreed warmly. I appreciate the thorough care. After hanging up, I immediately called Nicholas. They're moving. Medical evaluation to declare incompetency. Dr. Morrison, supposedly my physician. Morrison? A pause while he checked. No medical license in Florida under that name. It's fake. So, they're using a fake doctor to declare me incompetent. Attempted fraud on top of everything else. Nicholas's voice held grim satisfaction. Francis, keep the appointment. Record everything. I've arranged independent psychiatric evaluation for you tomorrow morning. Dr. Patricia Chen, 30 years experience, impeccable credentials. They're fake diagnosis versus real professional assessment. We'll destroy them in court. That afternoon, I drove to the address provided. Shared medical building, multiple practices. I checked the directory in the lobby. No Dr. Morrison listed. The office number given led to a small suite with temporary signage, the kind you can print and tape up overnight. I sat in my car for a moment, phone recording device active in my shirt pocket. Nicholas had texted, "Police on standby have threatened?" I responded, "Everything ready? Let's see how far they'll go." For 40 years, I'd taught students to distinguish truth from manipulation, evidence from assumption, reality from performance. Today, I got to demonstrate those lessons in real time. Christopher and Edith had arranged this test thinking I'd fail. They had no idea I'd been preparing my entire professional life for exactly this kind of challenge. I opened the car door and walked toward the building, steady and certain. Dr. Patricia Chen's office smelled of leather furniture and subtle lavender. I sat across from her, completing the final cognitive assessment. Pattern recognition puzzles that would have challenged my students. Memory questions I answered with dates and details. Executive function tests I navigated systematically. Her sharp eyes watched everything. 3 decades of forensic psychiatry evident in how she observed not just answers but approach, methodology, reasoning. Fully competent, she said finally, setting down her pen. No cognitive decline, analytical skills above age group average, no indicators of paranoia or delusion. Frankly, Mr. Wilson, your mental acuity rivals people half your age. I thanked her, accepted the preliminary documentation, and drove home satisfied. The fake Dr. Morrison appointment from yesterday had been exactly what I'd expected. Shabby office with temporary signage, someone claiming credentials they didn't possess. Questions designed to create appearance of incompetency regardless of answers. I'd recorded everything. Now I had the contrast. Fraudulent evaluation versus legitimate professional assessment. But as I pulled into my driveway, satisfaction evaporated. Christopher's car blocked the entrance. My son stood on the porch, envelope in hand. His face set with desperate determination I recognized from students who'd cheated and been caught, but were trying one final bluff. He approached my car window before I could exit. His hand shook slightly as he thrust the envelope forward. "Dad, this is for your own good. You're not well. We need to protect you." I took the papers, read them thoroughly. Petition for guardianship due to incapacity. The allegations were detailed and damning. Paranoid delusions regarding family members, progressive memory loss, financial incompetence, danger to self due to unstable behavior, supporting documentation attached, sworn statements from witnesses, medical reports, incident logs. I read every word while Christopher shifted his weight, unable to meet my eyes. "Whose safety, Christopher?" I asked quietly. "Mine or yours?" He fled to his car without answering. Nicholas arrived within an hour of my call. We spread the court documents across my dining room table. The same table where I'd first organized evidence months ago. His professional calm cracked as he read. "They're claiming you're incompetent after attempted murder failed." He flipped through pages. The audacity of this, these witness statements, these medical reports. "Desperation breeds boldness," I said. "Read the witness list." Mrs. Patterson from next door claimed she'd seen me wandering the yard in pajamas at midnight. Tom Chen from book club noticed increasing confusion during discussions. Dr. Sarah Williams from Silver Palms Medical provided detailed psychiatric evaluation showing progressive dementia. "You never met Drive Williams." Nicholas said never, but her credentials are real. Edith arranged this through her medical connections. I pointed to another statement. "And these neighbors, I need to talk to them." That evening, I walked door to door, teaching journal in hand. Most neighbors were embarrassed, ashamed. Mrs. Patterson's voice trembled. "Christopher said it was just to help with your care, that you'd approved it. I didn't realize it was for court." "What exactly did you see, Margaret?" "You outside at night by the bushes in your pajamas." "I was checking security cameras I'd installed at 11 p.m. not midnight, in shorts and t-shirt, not pajamas." I kept my voice gentle. Teacher comforting confused student. "Christopher showed you what he wanted you to see." She broke down crying, promised to recant. 2 other neighbors had similar stories. Manipulation, context removed, innocent behavior twisted. But 3 neighbors refused to speak with me. I learned later Christopher had paid them. 500 here, 300 there. Small amounts to people struggling financially, enough to buy false testimony. The preliminary hearing came 2 weeks later. I sat beside Nicholas, posture straight, taking organized notes, visible demonstration of competency. Christopher and Edith sat across the aisle with their attorney, expensive suit, and calculated confidence. Where had Christopher found money for lawyers like this? More debt, probably digging deeper holes. Judge Thompson reviewed both sides' filings with evident skepticism. Court-appointed psychiatric evaluation ordered. Dr. Patricia Chen will conduct assessment and report findings. Nicholas and I exchanged subtle glances. She had already evaluated me, knew I was competent. The trap was working perfectly. After the hearing, Nicholas wanted immediate action. We file criminal charges now. Everything we have, attempted murder, fraud, forgery, we can end this. I shook my head. If we file now, they'll know we have everything. They'll lawyer up completely. Maybe flee. I want them to keep digging. Let them think they're winning. Francis, that's risky. I taught for 40 years, James. Students reveal most when they think they're succeeding. Right now, Christopher and Edith believe their guardianship petition might work. Let them invest more in that belief. Let them commit more crimes trying to support it. Then we bury them completely. He objected. Professional instinct demanded immediate prosecution, but respected my decision. Client autonomy even when the client was choosing the difficult path. That evening, I visited the bank, requested complete audit trail of all account activities for the past year. The manager, sympathetic now that investigation had revealed fraud attempts, provided comprehensive records. I spent hours with a highlighter, marking every unauthorized transaction, visual timeline of theft, evidence for prosecution. Several weeks passed. Christopher's behavior grew more erratic as his gambling debts became collection threats. I learned this through Nicholas's investigation. $75,000 owed across 3 sources: online sports betting, local card games, casino markers, threatening messages, and recovered deleted emails. Timeline showed debt accumulation had accelerated 6 months before the murder plot began. Motive clear as classroom chalk on blackboard. My phone rang late one evening. Nicholas, court-appointed evaluation scheduled. Dr. Chen will conduct it next week. Also, Christopher's gambling situation is worse than we thought. Those debts are why he's desperate. Bookmakers don't accept apologies. I absorbed the information, made notes in my growing case files, everything organized into labeled folders: financial fraud, forged documents, attempted murder, false medical claims, witness tampering, every piece of evidence cross-referenced, timeline visualized. I stood in my study looking at the wall where I had assembled everything. Photos, documents, dates connected with string like detective boards and movies. Except this was real. And the conspiracy led to my son and his wife. 40 years I'd taught students that truth requires patience. Evidence must be overwhelming. Presentation must be irrefutable. Christopher and Edith had given me months to build this case while they thought they were winning. Now they'd learned the final lesson. The teacher always knows more than the students realize. Class was almost over. Time for final exam. Dr. Patricia Chen's court-appointed evaluation report sat on Nicholas's conference table between us. I read the conclusion for the second time, savoring each word. Subject demonstrates full cognitive capacity. No evidence of dementia or incompetency. Analytical skills above age group average. No indicators of paranoia or delusion. Recommendation. Petition for guardianship be denied. Nicholas spread additional documents across the table. Months of evidence compilation organized into devastating presentation. 3 ring binders, color-coded tabs, chronological timeline poster, exhibits numbered and cross-referenced. Teacher recognized fellow educators' methodology. This was curriculum of crimes, comprehensive and irrefutable. We file today, Nicholas stated, not question statement. I nodded once. Everything, all of it. The counter-suit was 47 pages detailing 18 separate criminal acts. Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, multiple counts of forgery, elder financial abuse, witness tampering, obstruction of justice. The criminal complaint ran 23 pages. Evidence exhibits filled 2 boxes. Nicholas and his paralegal delivered everything to the courthouse clerk. I watched from nearby bench as the clerk processed paperwork, paused, read further, then called her supervisor. The supervisor read face growing serious, then picked up the phone to judge's chambers. Within hours, emergency hearing scheduled. The system recognized severity immediately. That afternoon, Professional process server went to my house where Christopher and Edith still lived because I'd never formally evicted them. Strategic decision to keep them close, monitored. I sat in my car across the street, phone recording, watching. The server rang the doorbell. Edith answered. He handed her the envelope, identified himself officially. I zoomed my camera, captured her face as she read the first page. Shock, recognition, fear. The progression took seconds. She called for Christopher. Their argument was visible through the window, even from my distance. The process server's official report, later entered as evidence, documented everything. Subject Edith Wilson opened door at 2:17 p.m. served papers. She read first page, face drained of color. Quote, "This can't be. He didn't. How did subject called for Christopher Wilson?" Quote from Edith Wilson. "You said he was too old to figure it out. You promised." She stopped speaking when she noticed me. That evening, my security cameras captured their panic. Christopher at his computer, frantically deleting files, emptying recycle bins, attempting hard drive wipes. Edith shredding documents until the machine overheated and jammed. She kicked it, then continued tearing papers manually. Nicholas had remote access to the camera feeds. I'd granted him viewing rights weeks ago. He called me. Grim satisfaction in his voice. "They're destroying evidence. Every deletion is another charge. Obstruction of justice, consciousness of guilt. They're creating new crimes, trying to hide old ones. Are you documenting everything?" I asked. "Every frame, timestamped, backed up to encrypted servers. Even if they destroy every physical piece, we have digital archive that's untouchable." The next morning, their attorney requested emergency meeting with Nicholas. The settlement offer came quickly. Christopher and Edith would return the $38,000, vacate the property immediately, relinquish all inheritance claims, accept permanent restraining order. In exchange, I dropped criminal charges. Nicholas brought the offer to my house. We sat in the dining room where this had all begun, where I'd first spread evidence and understood the scope of betrayal. I read the settlement terms slowly, then looked at Nicholas. They want to walk away, pay back stolen money, promise to behave, and face no consequences for trying to kill me. That's the offer. I tore the paper in half, then quarters, then smaller pieces. Let them fall onto the table like snow. They tried to murder me, James. Not steal from me. Murder me. Edith researched undetectable poisons. Christopher negotiated my death price. They planned it for months while living in my house, eating my food, pretending concern. Trial is unpredictable. I taught for 40 years. Students who cheated, who lied, who thought they were clever. They never learned from easy forgiveness. Only consequences taught real lessons. I met his eyes. Christopher and Edith need that lesson. Schedule trial. Public trial. I want jury verdict. I want public record. I want justice, not convenience. Nicholas collected the torn pieces, added them to evidence file, documentation of settlement rejection, proof I wanted full accountability. Mildred called that evening after learning about the trial. "I heard you're using my recording that you're taking them to court. Your evidence is central," I confirmed. "Are you comfortable testifying publicly?" "Absolutely." Her voice was firm, certain what they tried to do. "My father didn't get justice. Maybe through your case his memory gets some. I'll testify. I'll tell everything I heard. Thank you. You saved my life. Now help me save others from them." Over the following days, Christopher's world unraveled visibly. His gambling debts became public as bookmakers filed their own claims. Collection agencies called constantly. I heard the phones through the walls through the house I knew intimately. Edith and Christopher's arguments grew more vicious, blame shifting constantly. The prosecutor's office assigned the case to their senior team. Nicholas relayed their assessment, one of the clearest elder abuse cases they had seen. Evidence overwhelming, conviction highly probable. Trial date set for late August. I stood in my study that evening, looking at the wall where I'd created visual timeline of the conspiracy. Photos, documents, dates connected by string. Months of evidence displayed, patterns clear, guilt undeniable. I removed one photo from the board. Old picture of Christopher at 8 years old, smiling, gap-toothed, innocent. The boy who'd once called me his hero, who brought me dandelions and construction paper cards on Father's Day. I held that photo, allowed myself one moment of grief for the son who could have been, should have been, never was. Then I placed it in my desk drawer and closed it firmly. "I raised you better than this," I said to the empty room. "You chose differently. Now we both live with consequences." I turned off the study light, walked out. Tomorrow brought preparation for trial. Tonight, I allowed myself to mourn the relationship that had died long before the murder plot began. The boy in that photo was gone. The man who tried to kill me would face justice. 3 weeks had passed since I rejected their settlement offer. The house felt different now, lighter, cleaner, like pressure released from a sealed container. Christopher and Edith had moved out 2 days ago, following formal eviction order. And I walked through spaces they had occupied, noting what they'd left behind in their hasty departure. Unpaid bills scattered across the bedroom floor, broken picture frames, clothing abandoned in closets. Christopher's childhood baseball trophy, ironically awarded for sportsmanship. Edith's medical textbooks, tools of a profession she'd lost. Their wedding album documenting a union now fracturing. I photographed everything. Not vindictively, just documentarily. Teacher's instinct. Preserve records. Maintain evidence. My phone buzzed. Nicholas. Christopher's car was repossessed this morning. Bookmakers are filing liens. Their apartment lease required 3 months up front. They borrowed from Edith's sister. Everything's collapsing. I read the message twice. Felt no satisfaction. Just inevitable progression of consequences. The gambling debts, now public through court filings, had triggered aggressive collection. Bookmakers discovered Christopher wouldn't inherit my estate. My new will, filed publicly, showed charitable donation instead. They escalated, threatening calls, workplace visits, public confrontations. $18,000 still owed on the repossessed car. Credit cards maxed, bank accounts garnished. Christopher tried borrowing from friends, family, anyone. Most refused, having learned the truth. His desperation became neighborhood gossip. Edith's professional destruction paralleled their financial ruin. Silver Palms Medical Center's investigation revealed her data breaches, accessing patient records without authorization, creating false medical documents, sharing confidential information. Florida Medical Board opened disciplinary case. The clinic terminated her employment immediately, flagged her credentials. Future healthcare employment virtually impossible. 15 years of career building ended in a 15-minute meeting. Security escort walked her out. Confiscated badge and keys. Former colleagues watched, whispered. She drove to their apartment, sat in the car for an hour before facing Christopher. Their new apartment was in a declining neighborhood, all they could afford now. The contrast with my comfortable home became daily reminder of their choices. Through thin walls, neighbors heard their arguments escalate. "This is your fault," Edith's voice carried through walls late one night. "Your gambling, your debts, your weakness." My weakness. Christopher's response was defensive, desperate. "You wanted him dead. I wanted money. You wanted murder. And now we have nothing. No money, no house, no future. We have each other." Edith bitter laugh. That's the worst part. Neighbors documented these fights, discussed them next morning. News spread. Community judgment was harsh and complete. One afternoon, Edith's sister arrived at Nicholas's office looking mortified. I was there reviewing final trial preparations. They asked me to bring this. She handed over an envelope like it burned her fingers. I told them it was pointless, but their family. "Read it for me," I said. She opened it reluctantly. "We offer $100,000 in exchange for dropping all charges. We acknowledge mistakes and seek resolution." "Mistakes?" I repeated the word slowly. "They call attempted murder mistakes." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I don't recognize my sister anymore." I pulled out a pen, wrote directly on their offer. Single sentence in my teacher-perfect handwriting. "Justice is not for sale. See you in court." I handed it back unsigned. "They won't accept this." She said they'll be devastated. Good. They should be. Devastation is appropriate response to attempted murder and betrayal. I met her eyes. "Tell them the only settlement I'll accept is the one the judge pronounces." Over the following days, former neighbors who'd initially testified for Christopher, the 3 who'd accepted payment, contacted Nicholas, requesting to change testimony. They'd learned the full truth, felt manipulated, wanted to correct the record. I watched these meetings, saw their shame, offered no comfort, but accepted their truth. Justice required accurate testimony, not punishing confused witnesses. One recanting witness, an elderly man who'd taken $500, looked directly at me. "Christopher said you'd approved everything, that signatures were just formalities." I needed the money. My rent was late. But then I learned what they really tried to do. Murder isn't helping with paperwork. "Then tell the truth," I said completely. "That's all I ask." The trial date approached. Christopher's employer after workplace collection visits put him on probation. Edith's medical board hearing was scheduled for September. Professional license revocation likely. Their marriage was toxic waste, corrosive to everything it touched. I stood in my bedroom one evening looking at the calendar. Trial dates circled in red. 3 days away. I had laid out courtroom clothing, pressed suit, conservative tie, polished shoes, teacher preparing for important lecture. Phone rang. Nicholas, final witness prep tomorrow morning. Then we're ready. I'll be there, I confirmed. After hanging up, I looked around my quiet house. For the first time in months, I felt peaceful, not happy. Peace and happiness are different things, but calm, certain. Justice delayed is not justice denied. I took out the old photo of young Christopher from my desk drawer, the one I'd put away weeks ago. Looked at it one final time. The innocent child who became guilty adult. I wrote on the back, I gave you everything. You chose this path. I choose justice. Placed it in an envelope, sealed it, addressed it to Christopher for delivery after trial. Not cruel, just honest. Final communication between father and son. Then I went to bed. Slept soundly for the first time in months. Preparation complete. Tomorrow consequences arrive. The morning of trial arrived with sunrise just beginning to paint Orlando's sky. I woke early, dressed carefully in the suit I had laid out the previous night. Tie knotted precisely, muscle memory from 40 years of professional dressing. Shoes polished until they reflected light. Breakfast was simple. Coffee, toast, routine maintained despite the day's significance. I reviewed nothing. Preparation was complete. Evidence memorized. Testimony ready. Nicholas picked me up at 8. We drove to the courthouse in comfortable silence. Professionals prepared for performance. I watched morning traffic. Ordinary people beginning ordinary days. Mine would be anything but ordinary, but necessary. Justice requires witnesses, requires public record, requires official pronouncement. The courtroom filled quickly. Media present. The case had attracted attention. Christopher and Edith sat with their attorney, looking diminished, defeated before verdict was announced. I sat behind the prosecution table, posture straight, calm. Judge entered. Everyone rose. The prosecutor's opening statement outlined the conspiracy clearly. Evidence will show defendants plotted to murder Francis Wilson for insurance money. They researched methods, obtained substances, created false documents, manipulated medical systems. Only intervention by alert flight attendant prevented this murder. Defense offered weak argument about family misunderstandings and poor communication. The jury's attention remained on the prosecution. Evidence presentation was systematic and devastating. Mildred's video played on courtroom screens. Her recording filled the room. Edith's voice unmistakable. Pills in his drink. Heart attack at altitude. 500,000. Christopher flinched hearing it. Edith stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Mildred took the stand, voice shaking initially, but strengthening as she testified. I heard her clearly. She talked about heart attack, about altitude, making it believable. She mentioned insurance money. I recorded it because I knew I had to have proof. Defense attempted cross-examination. Isn't it true you were in financial distress yourself? Mildred's response was firm. I didn't misinterpret murder. My financial situation is exactly why I understand desperation, but I didn't let it make me a killer. Forensic document examiner confirmed signature forgeries. Bank representatives detailed unauthorized transfers totaling $38,000. Dr. Patricia Chen testified to my full mental competency, destroying the incompetency claims entirely. Email evidence showed correspondence with medical consultant about lethal substances. Each piece built an irrefutable case. Then I took the stand. Oath administered, I settled into the witness chair. 40 years teaching had prepared me for public speaking, managing attention, delivering information clearly. When did you first suspect something was wrong? The prosecutor asked. The invitation to Miami was unusual. Their sudden attention after months of distance. Small things that pattern recognition tells you matter. What did you do? What I taught students for 40 years. Gather evidence, document everything, verify sources, build comprehensive case before drawing conclusions. I applied academic rigor to my own survival. Defense attorney's cross-examination was brief, ineffective. My credibility was unshakable. Facts verified by overwhelming evidence. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood. On count 1, conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty. Count 2, fraud, guilty. Count 3, forgery, guilty. Down the list. Each guilty hit Christopher and Edith visibly. Edith's composure finally cracked. Single tear quickly wiped away. Christopher dropped his head into his hands. Sentencing phase arrived. Judge asked if I wished to make victim impact statement. I stood faced Christopher and Edith directly. You lived in my house. I provided for you. I trusted you. You responded by plotting my death. I don't hate you. I pity you. You destroyed your lives for money you'll never see. That's justice enough. I sat. Judge nodded. Appreciation for brevity and dignity. Sentences. Christopher received 3 years probation with strict conditions. Edith, 5 years, longer due to professional credential abuse. Both ordered to repay $38,000 stolen funds plus $50,000 punitive damages. Permanent restraining order. All inheritance rights permanently revoked. Criminal records permanent. Judge's statement was clear. This case represents calculated systematic betrayal of familial trust. Your victim's mercy in requesting probation rather than imprisonment is more than you deserve. Court adjourned outside on courthouse steps. Media waited. I gave brief statement. Justice has been served. I hope this case reminds families that trust is sacred and betrayal carries consequences. I declined further questions. Walked toward the parking garage. Saw Christopher one final time. Exiting through side door, head down, avoiding cameras. Our eyes met briefly. He looked away first. I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even sadness anymore. Just completion. Chapter closed. Nicholas drove me home. We rode in silence, comfortable and complete. As we pulled into my driveway, he extended his hand. You did good, Francis. Real good. We did, I corrected. Thank you. Inside my house, I stood in the quiet hallway. House was mine again, legally, physically, emotionally. I walked to my study, saw the timeline board I had created weeks ago, covered with evidence, documentation. Carefully, methodically, I began taking it down. Each photo, each document removed and filed. The conspiracy existed. Justice was delivered. But I wouldn't live surrounded by reminders of betrayal. I placed all documentation in a banker's box, labeled it Christopher, case closed, August 2025, stored it in the closet, not forgotten, but archived. Then I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, composed an email to the local high school principal. I'm a retired history teacher with 40 years experience. I'd like to volunteer, teaching 2 afternoons weekly, no compensation needed. I have stories worth telling, lessons worth sharing. Students should know that knowledge protects, documentation matters, and justice, though slow, arrives for those patient enough to pursue it properly. I hit send, closed the laptop, looked around my study, books I'd collected, papers I'd graded, life I'd built, everything intact despite Christopher and Edith's attempts to destroy it. I smiled slightly, first genuine smile in months. Not because I was happy. Happiness would take time, but because I was free, justice delivered, conscience clear, future unwritten, tomorrow I would begin again. The past was archived where it belonged. Today I was just a teacher with lessons to share and a life to live. That was enough. That was everything.
And that concludes this story. That was a pretty wild one if you ask me. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. Now, let's get right into the next story. It's titled,
When I collapsed at work, the doctors called my wife. She never came. Instead, my wife's sister tagged me in a photo. Family day without the drama. I said nothing. Days later, still weak and hooked to machines, I saw 44 missed calls and a text from my wife and her dad. We need you. Answer immediately. Without thinking twice, you know what's funny about dying? It doesn't give a damn about your PowerPoint presentation or whether you've hit your quarterly targets. Monday morning, 10:47 a.m. to be exact. Yeah, I remember because the digital clock on the conference room wall was the last thing I saw before my body decided to stage a full-scale rebellion right there in front of my boss and half the marketing department. 1 minute I'm clicking through slide 17 of Q3 revenue optimization strategies. Riveting stuff really. And the next minute, my chest feels like someone's using my ribcage as a punching bag while simultaneously wrapping a python around my lungs. My head started spinning like I just chugged a bottle of tequila at a frat party, except without any of the fun that usually comes before that kind of dizziness. Johnson, you okay? That was Peterson from accounting. Probably more concerned about missing his lunch break than my imminent demise. Real touching, Pete. I tried to answer. Tried to play it cool, like maybe I was just having an allergic reaction to our office motivational posters or something, but my voice came out as this weird wheeze that sounded like a deflating balloon. Then the floor, that ugly beige carpet we'd all been complaining about for 3 years, suddenly rushed up to meet my face with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever. Lights out. When I came to, I was staring up at those god-awful fluorescent hospital lights that make everyone look like extras in a zombie movie. You know, the ones they flicker just enough to make you question your sanity and cast shadows that would make a funeral director jealous. My chest felt like someone had parked a small car on it and there were more wires attached to me than a Best Buy display model. "Welcome back," said this nurse with kind eyes and scrubs covered in cartoon cats. "Because nothing says professional medical care like Hello Kitty, right? You gave us quite a scare there, hon. You're lucky to be here." Lucky? Yeah, that's exactly how I felt lying there looking like a human Christmas tree with all those monitor wires. Real blessed. Then came Dr. Martinez, or was it Gonzalez? Hell, my brain was still doing somersaults. So, let's just call him Dr. Serious Face. Guy had that look that doctor's perfect in medical school. The one that says, "I'm about to deliver news that'll make your insurance premiums look like pocket change. Mr. Johnson, you've suffered what we call a cardiac event," he said, consulting his clipboard like it held the secrets of the universe. "A serious one. Your heart essentially said nope and took an unscheduled vacation." Cardiac event. Got to love medical terminology. They make it sound like your heart threw a surprise party instead of nearly killing you. But I got the message loud and clear. I've had a heart attack at 34, which is about as appealing as finding out your favorite restaurant has been serving wrap burgers. "We've contacted your emergency contact," Dr. Siri Face continued. "Your wife Clara, she should be here soon." Should be. Those two words hung in the air like a bad smell. Clara should be here. My wife of 6 years, the woman who promised to love me in sickness and in health. Remember that little Jim from the wedding vows? Should be rushing through those hospital doors right about now, probably crying and clutching a teddy bear or some flowers she grabbed from the gift shop. But here's the thing about should be. It's about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. Night 1, nothing. No Clara bursting through the door. No frantic phone calls asking about my condition. Just me, the beeping machines, and a steady rotation of nurses who kept checking if I needed anything. Yeah, I needed something. All right. I needed my wife to give a damn that I'd nearly shuffled off this mortal coil. I kept staring at my phone like some lovesick teenager, willing it to buzz with a text, a call. Hell, even a carrier pigeon would have been something. The screen stayed as dead as my marriage apparently was. Day 2 rolled around and still no sign of Clara. The young doctor, Dr. Ruiz, according to his name tag, kept patting my arm with that practiced sympathy they teach in medical bedside manner 101. "Rest up, Mr. Johnson," he'd say. "Someone should be here soon. Someone should be here soon." There's that word again, should. It was starting to feel like a cruel joke, like expecting your GPS to work in a tunnel or believing politicians actually mean what they say during campaign season. The nurses tried to be encouraging. "Traffic's probably bad," suggested the one with the cat scrubs. "Maybe she's stuck at work," offered another. "Sure, because nothing says loving spouse like prioritizing spreadsheets over your husband's coronary incident." I spent those first 2 days in a weird mental fog. Partly from the medication and partly from the crushing realization that the person who was supposed to care most about whether I lived or died had apparently decided I wasn't worth the gas money to drive to the hospital. The other patients on my floor. And yeah, hospital walls are about as soundproof as tissue paper. Had visitors constantly. Room 314 had so many flowers it looked like a funeral home exploded. Room 318's family brought enough food to feed a small army. Me? I got acquainted with every rerun of The Price is Right and became best friends with the vending machine down the hall. But here's what really got to me. It wasn't even anger I felt. You'd think I'd be furious, right? Ready to throw my Jell-O cup at the wall and demand answers. Instead, I felt this weird hollow numbness, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and replaced it with cotton balls. Maybe that's what happens when the person who's supposed to love you unconditionally proves that their love comes with more conditions than a cell phone contract. Maybe your brain just shuts down the disappointment center to prevent a complete system failure. By the end of day 2, I'd stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes. I'd stopped making excuses for Clara in my head. I'd stopped expecting anything at all. And you know what? That might have been the first healthy thing I'd done in years. The machines kept beeping, monitoring my vitals, making sure my heart kept doing its job, despite the fact that it had apparently better instincts about my marriage than my brain did. Smart organ, the heart. Shame I hadn't listened to it sooner. But that was about to change. Day 3 in hotel hospital a lot, and I'm starting to feel like Tom Hanks in that movie where he's stuck on the island. Except instead of a volleyball named Wilson, I've got a heart monitor that beeps every time I think about how spectacularly my wife has failed at basic human decency. I'm lying there counting ceiling tiles like some kind of demented mathematician. There are 247 of them. In case you're wondering, when my phone decides to finally make some noise, for about half a second, my stupid optimistic heart does this little hopeful flutter that probably registered on every machine I'm hooked up to. Maybe it's Clara. Maybe she's been in some kind of accident herself. Or maybe her phone died. Or maybe she's been trapped under something heavy and just now managed to crawl to safety. You know, all those ridiculous scenarios your brain conjures up when someone you love acts like you've suddenly become invisible. But no. Oh, hell no. It's Instagram. Because of course it is. In an age where people document their breakfast like they're running for office, why would a little thing like their family member nearly dying interrupt their social media schedule? The notification reads that Felicity Jones tagged you in a photo. Felicity, that's Clara's younger sister. The one who thinks influencer is a real job and that taking pictures of her avocado toast constitutes contributing to society. She's got about as much depth as a puddle in August. But hey, at least she's consistent. I tap the notification with the kind of morbid curiosity you get when you drive past a car accident. You know it's going to be bad, but you just can't look away. And there it is in all its filtered Valencia-tinted glory. A perfect little family tableau that looks like it came straight out of a Hallmark commercial. There's Felicity, blonde hair catching the sunlight just so, wearing one of those flowy sundresses that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Next to her is Clara, my wife. Remember her? Looking radiant and carefree in a way I haven't seen in months. But wait, there's more. Because standing behind them like some kind of suburban patriarchal statue are Clara's parents, Robert and Margaret. Robert's got his arm around Margaret. Both of them beaming with the kind of joy you'd expect from people who just won the lottery, not people whose son-in-law is currently cosplaying as a human pin cushion in the cardiac unit. The setting is picture perfect, too, because of course it is. They're at Clearwater Lake about 2 hours north of the city. The place where Clara and I had our first anniversary picnic. Remember that, honey? When we were still pretending we liked each other. There's a red checkered blanket spread out on the grass. A wicker basket that probably came from some boutique that charges $50 for a rustic charm. And enough gourmet sandwiches and artisanal beverages to feed a small European country. The caption. Oh, the caption is where Felicity really shows her true colors in her signature mix of basic girl aesthetic and casual cruelty. She's written Family Day. Without the drama too heart sparkles, sometimes you need to surround yourself with people who lift you up. #blessed #family time #no filter needed #ache life #drama free. But here's the real kicker. The thing that makes me want to rip these heart monitor wires off and use them to strangle someone. They tagged me. Actually tagged me in this monument to their collective sociopathy. Like they wanted me to see it. Like they wanted me to know that while I was lying in a hospital bed, wondering if my ticker was going to give up the ghost permanently, they were out there living their best life without the inconvenience of my near-death experience cramping their style. I stare at this digital middle finger for a solid 5 minutes. My brain trying to process what I'm looking at. The timestamp says the photo was posted about 2 hours ago, which means they were out there having their little family bonding session right around the time Dr. Ruiz was explaining to me that I'd need to make some significant lifestyle changes if I wanted to see 40. The comment section is exactly what you'd expect from Felicity's followers, a parade of heart eye emojis and squad goals. And you guys are so cute because nothing says cute like abandoning your family member in their hour of need to go have a photo shoot by the lake. But then I scroll down a little further and see something that makes my blood pressure spike so high I'm surprised it doesn't trigger every alarm in the ICU. One of Clara's cousins, I think it's Jessica or maybe Jennifer, one of those J names that all sound the same, has commented. "Where's Johnson?" Faced with tears of joy. And Felicity, sweet, thoughtful Felicity, has responded with a laughing crying emoji and the words. He's taking some time to work on himself. Flexed biceps were supporting his journey. Folded hands. My journey. My journey. Like I chose to have a heart attack. Like I decided, you know what would be fun? Let me nearly die on a Monday morning and see if anyone gives a screenshot the whole thing, because at this point I'm collecting evidence like I'm building a case, though I'm not sure what kind of case you can build against people for being heartless pieces of human garbage. Is there a court for crimes against basic decency? Can you sue someone for being a sociopath with a smartphone? The worst part, and there are so many parts to choose from, it's like a sampler platter of awful, is that I can picture exactly how this went down. Clara probably got the call from the hospital while she was getting ready for work. Maybe she paused for a whole 30 seconds, considering whether she should come check on her husband, who just had a cardiac event. Then Felicity probably called with some crisis about her boutique or her latest social media strategy. And suddenly, my medical emergency became this inconvenient speed bump in their family fun day planning. I can hear the conversation now. Oh my God, Clara, we can't cancel our late day because Johnson had some kind of episode. He's probably fine. You know how dramatic he gets. Besides, this is the perfect lighting for my feed. And Margaret brought those cute vintage mason jars. And Clara, my dear wife Clara, probably nodded along because God forbid she miss out on being part of Felicity's latest attempt at Instagram fame, because that's what really matters here. Making sure the family brand stays strong while the actual family member withers away in a hospital bed. The ache in my chest isn't just from the heart attack anymore. It's something deeper, something that makes the physical pain feel like a paper cut compared to the realization that the people I thought loved me have been treating me like an optional side character in their lives. I set my phone down and stare back up at those ceiling tiles, but now I'm not counting them. I'm thinking about how sometimes the universe has a funny way of showing you exactly where you stand with people. Sometimes it takes nearly dying to realize that to some people, you were never really living in their world anyway. Something inside me shifts that day. Not breaks. Breaking would be too dramatic, too sudden. It's more like something just shuts down quietly, permanently. For days into my involuntary station at St. Mary's Hospital for the emotionally and physically broken, I'd settled into what the staff probably called acceptance, but what I preferred to think of as strategic numbness. You know that feeling when you've been punched in the gut so many times that your body just stops registering the pain? Yeah, that's where I was living now. In the sweet, sweet land of emotional anesthesia, where Instagram posts about family picnics and absent wives couldn't touch me because I'd officially run out of to give. I'd made friends with Jorge, the night janitor who spoke broken English, but had a PhD in reading people's. He'd taken one look at my visitor-less room and started bringing me decent coffee from the staff break room instead of that watered-down swill they serve to patients. We didn't talk much, language barrier and all, but sometimes the best therapy is just having someone acknowledge that your situation sucks without trying to fix it or explain it away. Dr. Ruiz had been checking on me more frequently, too. Probably because he'd noticed that my emergency contact was about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. He'd started asking careful questions about my support system at home, which is medical speak for why the hell is nobody visiting this poor bastard. I'd gotten pretty good at deflecting those conversations with jokes about being a social butterfly who just preferred his alone time. Real convincing stuff. But then my phone decided to have a goddamn seizure. I was half asleep, drifting in that weird hospital twilight zone where the morphine makes everything feel like you're watching your life through someone else's eyes when the buzzing started. Not just one buzz or two, but this relentless angry vibrating that sounded like a pissed-off wasp trapped in a mason jar. At first, I thought it was one of the machines malfunctioning. Wouldn't be the first time some piece of medical equipment decided to throw a tantrum while I was connected to it. But no, it was my phone lighting up like a Christmas tree in Times Square. Except instead of spreading holiday cheer, it was broadcasting what looked like a full-scale panic attack from area code 847. 44 missed calls. 44. I counted them twice because surely that couldn't be right. Who the hell calls someone 44 times in the span of 2 hours? The answer apparently was my loving wife and her dear old dad, Robert. You know, the same people who'd been too busy having lakeside picnics to check if I was still breathing for the past 4 days. But now, apparently, they needed me with the urgency of a SWAT team responding to a hostage situation. The calls had started around 2 p.m. and just kept coming like some kind of digital tsunami. Clara, Robert, Clara, Robert, Clara again. A perfect ping-pong match of desperation bouncing back and forth between the two people who'd apparently just remembered I existed. The call log read like a horror movie where the phone calls are coming from inside the house. Except in this case, they were coming from inside my marriage and they were about 4 days too late. Then came the text message, not messages, plural like normal human beings would send when they're trying to reach someone. Just one single perfectly crafted message that managed to say everything and nothing at the same time. We need you. Answer immediately. That was it. No. How are you feeling? No. Sorry we haven't been in touch. No. Hope you're not dead in a ditch somewhere. Just a demand wrapped up in the kind of tone you'd use to summon a dog who'd wandered too far from the yard. We need you. Answer immediately like I was some kind of customer service hotline they could call when their life wasn't working the way they wanted it to. And here's the beautiful irony. It came from both of them. A group text from Clara and Robert because apparently they'd coordinated this little intervention like they were planning a military operation. Probably sat around that same picnic table where they'd been celebrating their drama-free family time and decided that maybe, just maybe, they needed their personal ATM back online. I stared at that message for what felt like an hour, but was probably only about 5 minutes. The audacity was almost impressive. 4 days of radio silence while I lay in a hospital bed wondering if my ticker was going to give up entirely. And now they were hitting me with "we need you" like I was the for not being available. Like I'd been screening their calls while getting my chest cracked open and my arteries inspected by people with medical degrees. The funny thing, and by funny I mean soul-crushingly ironic, was how calm I felt reading it. You'd think 44 missed calls from your wife would send your heart rate through the roof. Especially when said heart had recently tried to quit its day job, but instead I felt this weird almost zen-like detachment, like I was reading someone else's drama, watching some other poor bastard's marriage implode in real time. That's when I remembered something I hadn't thought about in probably 5 years. My grandfather, Elias, my mom's dad, the one who taught me how to fish and how to spot from a mile away. Though he'd probably roll over in his grave if he knew how badly I'd forgotten that second lesson. He'd been the one person in my family who'd never asked me for anything. Never made me feel like my value was tied to what I could provide or fix or pay for. I hadn't called him since. Christ, when was the last time? Maybe Christmas 2 years ago. Clara had always found excuses why we couldn't visit him. Too far away, not enough time. He lived in that tiny apartment that smelled like old books and pipe tobacco. She'd wrinkled her nose every time I mentioned him, like he was some embarrassing relic from my past that she'd prefer to keep buried. But sitting there in that hospital bed, staring at 44 missed calls and a text message that treated me like a malfunctioning appliance, I found myself scrolling through my contacts until I found his number. Elias Morrison, listed right there between emergency plumber and Frank from accounting, like he was just another service provider instead of the one person who'd ever loved me without expecting anything in return. My hands were shaking, and this time it wasn't from the medication. As I hit the call button, it rang once, twice, and then, like some kind of miracle in a world that had been fresh out of them lately, I heard his voice. Hello. Same grilly tone I remembered, like he'd been smoking cigarettes and drinking whiskey since the Carter administration, which he probably had. Grandpa, my voice cracked like I was 13 again, calling him after getting beat up at school. It's me. It's your grandson. There was a pause, and for a second I thought maybe he didn't remember me. Maybe too much time had passed. Maybe I'd burned that bridge too when I'd let Clara convince me that family obligations were just another form of drama to be avoided. But then he said, "Which hospital?" Just like that. No questions about why I was calling after years of silence. No demands for explanations or apologies. Just which hospital? Like he'd been waiting by the phone for exactly this call. Like he'd known somehow that eventually I'd need someone who gave a damn whether I lived or died. And within an hour, 1 hour, compared to 4 days of nothing from my wife, he was there. When Elias walked into my hospital room, it was like watching a man step out of a time machine from when people actually gave a about each other. He was wearing the same old brown leather jacket I remembered from my childhood. The one that probably cost him a week's pay back in 1987, but had lasted through 3 decades of Chicago winters. His shoes were worn but polished, the kind of dress shoes that working-class guys wore to church on Sundays and job interviews on Mondays. Everything about him screamed old school in the best possible way. The first thing he did was look me dead in the eye. Not at the machines, not at the charts hanging at the foot of my bed, but right at me, like he was checking to make sure I was still in there somewhere underneath all the medical equipment and emotional wreckage. Then he pulled up that uncomfortable plastic chair that every hospital room comes equipped with and sat down like he had all the time in the world. "You look like hell," he said, which was probably the most honest thing anyone had said to me in days. No sugarcoating, no false cheerfulness, just straight up assessment from someone who'd seen enough of life to know that sometimes people look like hell because they feel like hell. "Thanks, Grandpa. Really know how to make a guy feel better about his near-death experience?" He chuckled. This dry, raspy sound that reminded me of autumn leaves crunching under your feet. "Son, if you wanted someone to blow sunshine up your ass, you should have called your wife." Ouch. But also, fair point. What happened next was peak Elias Morrison efficiency. While I'd been lying there for 4 days feeling sorry for myself and counting ceiling tiles, he spent exactly 30 minutes asking the right questions, the ones the doctor should have been hearing from my wife. What were my symptoms before the attack? Had I been under unusual stress? Was I taking any medications they should know about? What was my family medical history? You know, basic that might be relevant when someone's ticker decides to stage a revolt. But here's the kicker. Clara could have answered exactly 0 of those questions. She didn't know that my dad had died of a heart attack at 52. She didn't know that I'd been having chest pains for weeks, but had been too busy covering her sister's boutique rent to see a doctor. She didn't even know what medications I was allergic to, which is kind of important information when they're pumping you full of cardiac drugs. But Elias knew. He'd been paying attention for 67 years while everyone else had been treating me like a walking credit card with legs. Then he quietly excused himself and came back an hour later with paperwork. Turns out my insurance had been playing the classic let's deny coverage and hope this poor bastard dies before he can appeal game with some tests the cardiologist wanted to run. Standard operating procedure for American healthcare. Delay, deny, deflect, and pray the problem resolves itself permanently. Elias didn't argue with them or threaten to call lawyers or make a scene like Clara probably would have. He just pulled out his checkbook, an actual paper checkbook, because the man still balanced his accounts by hand like a civilized human being and wrote a check for the full amount. Just like that, problem solved. Grandpa, you can't. I can. And I did. Shut up and let them run the test. But that wasn't even the real bombshell. Oh no, the universe was just getting warmed up. After the nurses left and we had some privacy, Elias pulled out his tablet because despite being 74, the man was more tech-savvy than half the millennials I worked with and said those 4 words that would change everything. Let's look at your finances. Now, I thought I knew where my money went. I made decent cash, lived in a nice house, drove a reliable car. Sure, things were tight sometimes, but that's just modern life, right? Everyone's broke. Everyone's stressed. Everyone's one medical emergency away from financial ruin. That's the American dream, baby. Wrong. So wrong, it wasn't even funny. Elias had somehow, and I'm still not entirely sure how he managed this without access to my accounts, mapped out every single financial thread connecting me to Clara's family. It was like watching someone perform an autopsy on your bank account, except instead of finding a cause of death, they found a cause of slow, methodical bleeding. 5 accounts, 5 separate accounts that I'd somehow forgotten about or never really paid attention to, all tied to my name, all feeding money to various members of the Martinez family, like some kind of financial forup. Clara's personal checking account, which I'd added myself to for emergencies, and which she'd been using for her daily Starbucks habit and Target runs. The business account for Felicity's boutique, which I'd co-signed for just until she got established 3 years ago. A credit line for Robert's perpetually failing home improvement projects. Even an auto insurance policy that covered Clara's car, Felicity's car, and Margaret's ancient Honda. Jesus Christ, I whispered, staring at the numbers on his tablet screen. How did I not know about all this? Because they made sure you didn't know, Elias said matter-of-factly. Look here. Felicity's boutique rent gets automatically deducted from your business account on the 15th of every month. Has been for 3 years. You've been paying for her to play dress-up shop while she posts Instagram photos about being a girl boss entrepreneur. The rent alone was $1,500 a month. $1,500 every month for 3 years. That was $54,000 I'd unknowingly invested in my sister-in-law's delusion that she was the next big thing in overpriced scarves and motivational jewelry. But wait, there's more. Clara's car insurance, which I'd thought was maybe $200 a month, was actually covering 3 vehicles because family helps family, and I was apparently the designated family ATM. Robert's mortgage had gone into default twice in the past year, and both times, mystery payments had appeared from accounts linked to my name, saving their perfect suburban house from foreclosure. Holy shit, I said, scrolling through transaction after transaction. I've been carrying all of them. This whole time, I've been paying for their entire lifestyle. Elias leaned back in his chair and sighed. The kind of deep world-weary sigh that comes from watching someone you care about finally wake up to reality. Son, they don't love you, they use you. 6 words. 6 simple words that cut through 8 years of marriage. 8 years of trying to be the good husband, the reliable provider, the guy who never complained when money got tight because he was too busy making sure everyone else was comfortable. They don't love you, they use you. And sitting there in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines that were keeping track of my broken heart, I finally understood why it had tried to quit in the first place. It wasn't the stress of work or the long hours or the shitty corporate politics. It was the slow, steady realization that I'd been living my entire adult life as someone else's financial plan, someone else's backup option, someone else's safety net. I wasn't a husband to Clara. I wasn't a brother-in-law to Felicity. I wasn't a son-in-law to Robert and Margaret. I was a walking wallet with a pulse, and apparently not even a very reliable pulse at that. That night, while the nurses did their rounds and the machines beeped out their electronic lullabies, Elias and I began cutting the cords one by one, account by account, automatic payment by automatic payment. It was like performing surgery on my own financial life. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could actually breathe. If you've ever wanted to see what happens when you cut off the financial life support to a family of professional parasites, let me tell you, it's like watching a nature documentary about what happens when the watering hole dries up in the middle of the savannah. Except instead of graceful gazelles migrating to greener pastures, you get a bunch of grown-ass adults having public meltdowns because their personal ATM suddenly grew a spine. The reaction was so immediate, you'd have thought I'd detonated a nuclear bomb in their perfectly curated suburban lives. I'm talking less than 24 hours from the time Elias and I started canceling automatic payments and closing accounts. And my phone was lighting up like a Christmas tree on steroids. But this time, instead of feeling that familiar anxiety when Clara's name popped up on my screen, I felt something that was either enlightenment or the lingering effects of cardiac medication. Either way, it was liberating as hell. Clara's voicemail came first, and oh boy, was it a masterpiece of entitled indignation wrapped up in that fake concerned wife voice she'd perfected over the years. You know the tone, the one that sounds like she's talking to a particularly slow child who's just colored outside the lines for the 100th time. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing. She started because apparently having a heart attack and nearly dying was just me being dramatic for attention, but cutting off the accounts. Really? That's your solution? I don't know what's gotten into you, but this isn't the way to handle whatever midlife crisis you're having. You're being incredibly selfish right now, and frankly, it's embarrassing. I've been trying to give you space to deal with your issues, but this is crossing a line. Call me back. We need to talk like adults. Like adults, right? Because nothing says adult conversation like completely ignoring your spouse for 4 days while he's in the hospital and then lecturing him about responsibility when the money stops flowing. The sheer audacity was almost impressive, but Clara's voicemail was just the opening act. The real show started when Felicity's text came through, and I swear to God, it was like watching someone's entire personality collapse in real time. No cutesy emojis, no inspirational quotes, no hashtags about being blessed and grateful. Just raw, unfiltered panic from someone who just realized their entire business model was about to implode. My account balance is $19. Fix this. That was it. No. How are you feeling? No. Hope you're recovering well. Just a bank balance and a demand like I was customer service for her life. $19. That's what 3 years of playing entrepreneur had gotten her without daddy-in-law bankrolling the whole operation. $19 in a boutique full of scarves that probably cost more to make than they'd ever sell for. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same woman who'd been posting Instagram stories about building an empire and living that boss babe life while I'd been unknowingly covering her rent, utilities, insurance, and probably her daily iced coffee habit. Now she was down to grocery money and suddenly I was supposed to drop everything and fix this. Like her financial incompetence was somehow my emergency. But wait, there's more. Because Robert, dear old Robert, who'd been too busy enjoying his drama-free family picnic to visit his son-in-law in the hospital, decided to chime in with his own special brand of guilt trip masquerading as fatherly wisdom. You're destroying everything we built together. This family has been through enough without you throwing some kind of tantrum because you had a health scare. We're all here for you, but you have to meet us halfway. You can't just burn everything down because you're upset. Everything we built together. Let that marinate for a minute. According to Robert, the man who'd contributed exactly $0 and even less emotional support to any aspect of my life. We had built something together. Apparently, my money and their spending habits constituted some kind of collaborative effort that I was now selfishly destroying by having the nerve to control my own finances. And the health scare comment, chef's kiss, nothing minimizes a cardiac event quite like calling it a scare. Like, I'd been startled by a spider instead of having my heart literally try to quit its day job. Real sensitive stuff from the man who couldn't be bothered to visit me in the hospital, but could find time to lecture me about family loyalty via text message. But here's where it gets really good. And by good, I mean so pathetically predictable that I actually started laughing in my hospital bed, which probably made the nurses think the morphine had finally kicked in properly. Within 48 hours of the money getting cut off, Clara's family went from family day without the drama to full-scale social media meltdown mode. They posted a video, an actual honest-to-God video of their house, completely stripped bare after an eviction notice. Empty rooms, boxes scattered around. That particular brand of chaos that happens when the sheriff shows up and gives you 24 hours to get your together. Felicity was behind the camera, and you could hear her voice shaking as she filmed room after room of their former middle-class paradise. They took everything, she narrated like she was documenting some kind of natural disaster instead of the completely predictable consequences of their own financial irresponsibility. Everything we worked for, everything we built, gone. The caption was even better. They took everything. Guess who let them? With a broken heart emoji and tags for family support groups as if they were victims of some cosmic injustice instead of people who'd been living beyond their means for years on someone else's dime. But here's the thing that really got me. The thing that made me realize just how deep their delusion ran. They genuinely seemed to believe that the bank had stolen their house. Like some mustache-twirling villain in a black hat had shown up and arbitrarily decided to ruin their lives for shits and giggles. They were playing the victim so hard you'd think they'd been struck by lightning instead of being served an eviction notice for not paying their mortgage. Except I knew the truth. Thanks to Elias and his magical tablet of financial revelation, I knew exactly where their mortgage payments had gone for the past year. Robert had been using the mortgage money to fund Felicity's boutique inventory and Margaret's medical bills. They'd been robbing Peter to pay Paul. Except Peter was their own housing security. And Paul was a failing business that sold overpriced accessories to women going through their own midlife crisis. The bank hadn't stolen their house. They'd gambled it away, lost, and then acted shocked when the house always wins. They'd taken a perfectly good suburban home, paid for incidentally with a down payment that came from yours truly as a wedding gift to Clara, and turned it into collateral for their daughter's entrepreneurial fantasies. And now they wanted me to feel guilty about it. They wanted me to see that video of their empty house and their crocodile tears and rush back into the fold with my checkbook open and my mouth shut, ready to fix everything like I always had before. But lying there in that hospital bed, watching their perfectly orchestrated pity party play out on my phone screen, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Absolutely nothing. No guilt, no obligation, no desperate need to swoop in and save the day. Just a calm, clear understanding that this was what accountability looked like when it finally caught up with people who'd been avoiding it their whole lives. You know that moment in horror movies when you think the monster is finally dead and then its hand shoots up through the dirt for one last scare? Yeah. Well, welcome to my life where the monster was my wife's family and they were about to pull some next level psychotic that would make Stephen King proud. I was actually starting to feel human again. The docs had cleared me for discharge in a couple days. My chest wasn't feeling like someone had parked a semi on it. And for the first time in years, I was sleeping through the night without my brain spinning through endless lists of bills and obligations and who needed what money went. Turns out when you're not financially responsible for 4 other adults and their various catastrophes, life gets a lot less stressful. Who knew? Elias had been coming by every day, not because he felt obligated or because I was paying him to be there, but because that's what actual family does. We'd been working through the remaining financial loose ends, canceling the last few automatic payments, transferring accounts, basically performing surgery on 8 years of financial entanglement. It felt like detoxing from a drug I didn't even know I'd been addicted to. That's when he walked in with an envelope. Now, Elias wasn't the dramatic type. He didn't do grand gestures or mysterious presentations. When he had something to tell you, he just told you. But this time, he looked like he'd aged about 5 years overnight, and he was carrying that envelope like it contained anthrax or divorce papers or some other form of weaponized misery. "Son," he said, settling into that plastic chair that had basically become his personal throne. "We need to talk about what your wife's family is really up to." He opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of printed emails. Not forwarded emails or screenshots, but actual printed copies that someone had gone through the trouble of obtaining through what I could only assume were less than legal means. Elias had always been resourceful, but this was some next-level private investigator how did you don't ask questions you don't want answers to? He said, which was probably the most badass thing a 74-year-old man in a cardigan had ever said in the history of cardigans. The emails were between Clara Robert and someone named Marcus Hoffman from Hoffman & Associates Legal Services. And let me tell you, reading them was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, except the train was my entire life, and the wreck was happening in real time while I'd been unconscious in a hospital bed. The first email dated just 2 days after my heart attack was from Robert to this Hoffman guy with Claire Psych. The subject line alone made my blood pressure monitor start beeping like a smoke alarm. Emergency guardianship consultation urgent. Mr. Hoffman, Robert had written, as we discussed on the phone, my son-in-law has had a serious cardiac event and is currently hospitalized. His behavior since the incident has been increasingly erratic and concerning. He's made several irrational financial decisions that are putting his family's security at risk, and we're worried about his mental state. We need to explore options for temporary guardianship to protect his assets and ensure he gets the help he needs. Erratic behavior, irrational financial decisions, mental state. These were trying to have me declared incompetent because I'd stopped paying their bills. They were literally attempting to get legal control over my finances by claiming that cutting them off was evidence of mental illness. The next email from Clara was even better. She'd laid out a whole timeline of my supposed deteriorating mental health, starting with my decision to stop automatic payments and including such damning evidence as refusing to answer phone calls and isolating himself from family. According to my loving wife, my behavior over the past week had been so concerning that she feared for my safety and the safety of our financial future. Our financial future, right? Because apparently Clara's boutique funding and Robert's house payment gambling habits were integral parts of my financial future. But here's where it gets really evil. They found a lawyer who specialized in emergency guardianships for people with diminished capacity due to medical events. Apparently, it's a thing. When someone has a stroke or severe illness or say a cardiac event, concerned family members can petition the court to take control of their finances if they can prove the person isn't thinking clearly. The lawyer had laid out the whole strategy in his response email. They'd need medical documentation of my heart attack, witness statements about my erratic behavior, and evidence that I was making financial decisions that went against my established patterns. The goal was temporary guardianship. Just long enough to restore financial stability and ensure proper medical care. Translation: just long enough to get back control of my bank accounts and credit lines so they could continue bleeding me dry while I recovered from nearly dying. This is their nuclear option, Elias said, watching me read through email after email of their carefully planned scheme. When the crying and guilt trips didn't work, when the social media pity party didn't bring you running back with your checkbook open, they decided to just take legal control. I kept reading, my hands shaking, and this time it wasn't for medication or heart problems. It was pure concentrated rage. They'd spent more time planning this legal maneuver than they'd spent visiting me in the hospital. They'd put more effort into researching guardianship laws than they'd put into asking how I was feeling or whether I was going to live through this. The most insidious part was how legitimate they'd made it sound. Reading their emails, you'd think they were genuinely concerned family members trying to help a beloved relative who'd clearly lost his mind after a traumatic medical event. They'd even found character witnesses, Margaret's sister, who barely knew me, and some neighbor who'd apparently noticed that I'd been withdrawn and antisocial lately. Withdrawn and antisocial? Yeah. Probably because I'd been working myself into a heart attack to pay for everyone else's lifestyle, while my wife treated me like an inconvenient roommate who occasionally provided money. But the cherry on top of this sundae was Clara's final email to the lawyer. We just want what's best for him. He's not thinking clearly right now, and we're worried he's going to destroy everything we've worked so hard to build together. If we can just get temporary control until he's stable again, we can make sure he gets the help he needs and protect our family's future. There it was again, that beautiful delusion that their financial security was somehow my responsibility, that their poor decisions were my emergency, that their comfort was worth more than my autonomy. They were going to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could legally steal my money. They were going to use my heart attack, the medical emergency they'd been too busy to acknowledge, as evidence that I couldn't be trusted to manage my own finances. They were going to turn my recovery into their opportunity. The hearing scheduled for next week, Elias said quietly. They filed the petition yesterday. I looked up from the emails and for a moment I couldn't speak. The sheer scope of their betrayal was breathtaking. These weren't just greedy relatives trying to guilt me into opening my wallet again. These were people who were willing to have me declared legally incompetent to destroy my reputation, my autonomy, my basic human dignity just to keep their money train running. What do we do? I asked, though I already knew Elias wouldn't have brought me this information without having a plan. He smiled then, and it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who'd been around long enough to know exactly how to fight dirty when the situation called for it. We get ahead of this, he said, pulling out his phone. I've already called your lawyer. By tomorrow morning, you'll have cease and desist orders filed against all of them. Account freezes to prevent any unauthorized access and legal protections that'll make this guardianship petition look like what it really is, a money grab from people who never gave a damn about your well-being. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt something that might have been hope. Or maybe it was just the satisfaction of knowing that finally, someone was fighting for me instead of fighting to use me. When the legal nuclear option failed, because apparently having a lawyer who actually gave a about his client is more effective than having a lawyer who specializes in elder abuse disguised as family concern. Clara's clan decided to pivot to their backup plan. Destroy my reputation so thoroughly that I'd crawl back to them just to make it stop. It was like watching a master class in manipulation, except instead of being impressed, I was getting a front row seat to just how low people will go when their meal ticket gets a conscience. The whole thing started innocently enough, which should have been my first red flag. When has anything involving Felicity ever been innocent? She posted what looked like a simple selfie. No fancy filter, no perfect lighting, just her sitting in what appeared to be her car looking like she'd been crying for about 3 hours straight. Which, knowing Felicity's relationship with waterproof mascara, probably meant she'd been practicing in the mirror for 3 hours to get the perfect devastated but still photogenic look. The caption was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive emotional manipulation. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones going through the hardest times. When someone you care about is hurting, they might lash out at the people trying to help them. All we can do is send love and hope they find their way back to the family that's always been there for them. #family first #lovewins #p praying for healing. No names mentioned, of course. Felicity was way too smart to come right out and say, my brother-in-law is having a psychotic break and destroying our family. But she didn't need to. Anyone who'd been following their social media drama for the past week would know exactly who she was talking about. It was like a sub-tweet, but with the emotional manipulation cranked up to 11 and a side of Jesus hashtags for good measure. But that was just the opening shot. The real campaign began when Clara reposted it with her own addition, a broken heart emoji and the words, "Some battles are fought in private, but love always wins in the end. Praying for my husband's healing. Body, mind, and spirit." Red heart, broken heart, folded hands. Body, mind, and spirit. Like I was some kind of triple threat of dysfunction that needed divine intervention to function properly. Like my decision to stop funding their lifestyle was a symptom of mental illness rather than a long overdue reality check. Within hours, the post had been shared by Margaret, by Robert, by cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, by neighbors who probably couldn't pick me out of a police lineup, but were suddenly deeply concerned about my well-being. The comment section turned into a prayer circle meets intervention planning committee with everyone offering their thoughts and prayers for my recovery and their support for my brave wife, who was standing by her man during this difficult time. Brave wife. The woman who'd been too busy having lakeside picnics to visit me in the hospital was now being celebrated as some kind of saint for putting up with her clearly unstable husband. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife and serve it at their next drama-free family gathering. But Felicity wasn't done. Oh no, this was just Act 1 of her one-woman show titled How to Destroy Someone's Reputation Using Instagram Stories and Crocodile Tears. Act 2 came in the form of a video, a shaky handheld masterpiece that looked like it had been filmed during an earthquake, but was probably just Felicity's hands trembling from the emotional weight of her performance. The video showed her sitting in what I eventually recognized as her car parked outside their old house, the one they'd lost because they'd been using the mortgage payments to fund her boutique fantasies. Piano music played softly in the background because nothing says genuine emotion quite like a carefully curated soundtrack. "I don't usually do this," she began, her voice breaking in exactly the right places. "But sometimes you have to speak your truth, even when it's hard. Sometimes loved ones lash out when they're hurting. Sometimes the people we're trying to help the most are the ones who push us away the hardest." She paused here, wiping away a perfectly timed tear that had somehow managed not to smudge her makeup. Professional level emotional manipulation right there. "We've all been through so much lately as a family," she continued. "And when someone you love is struggling, when they're dealing with health issues and stress and all the things that life throws at us, sometimes they make decisions that hurt the people who love them most. But that doesn't mean you stop loving them. That doesn't mean you give up on them. Health issues and stress, right? Because having a heart attack because you've been working yourself to death to pay for other people's poor financial decisions is just stress. Because cutting off their access to your bank accounts after they've been bleeding you dry for years is just a symptom of not handling pressure well." The video went on like that for about 5 minutes. Felicity painting herself and her family as the long-suffering victims of my inexplicable cruelty, hinting just enough at my health issues to make it clear that I wasn't thinking straight, but never quite saying anything that could be used against her legally. It was like watching a politician give a non-apology apology, except instead of a sex scandal, it was about me having the audacity to control my own finances. Clara reposted the video with another broken heart emoji and the caption, "My heart breaks for our whole family right now. Praying for healing and restoration. Broken heart folded hands # standing in faith." And just like that, the narrative was set. I wasn't a man who'd nearly died and then discovered that his wife's family had been systematically draining his finances for years. I was a sick man who was lashing out at the people who loved him most. I wasn't someone who'd finally grown a spine and started setting boundaries. I was someone who was struggling and making decisions that hurt the people who love him most. The response was immediate and exactly what they'd been hoping for. My phone started buzzing with texts from people I hadn't heard from in months, all wanting to check in and make sure I was okay. Cousins from Clara's side of the family, co-workers who'd seen the posts, even my old college roommate who'd somehow gotten tagged in the whole mess. "Hey man, saw Clara's post. You doing all right? If you need to talk, I'm here thinking of you during this difficult time. Let me know if there's anything I can do. Praying for your family. Hope you guys can work through whatever's going on." For a hot minute, I actually started to doubt myself. When you've got dozens of people reaching out with concern for your mental health. When your own wife is publicly praying for your healing. When your sister-in-law is making tearful videos about how worried she is about you, it starts to mess with your head. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe cutting them off financially really was a sign that I wasn't thinking clearly. But then something beautiful happened. Someone, and I still don't know who, but I owe them a beer and possibly my firstborn child. Screenshot Felicity's old Instagram post. You know, the one from the family picnic. The one with the caption "Family Day without the drama." Some with face red heart #blessed #family time #lay cake life #no negativity. They posted it as a comment on Felicity's crying video with the simple caption interesting timing. And just like that, the whole house of cards came tumbling down because suddenly people started doing the math. Felicity posts about having a drama-free family day without me while I'm in the hospital. A week later, she's making videos about how much she loves and worries about me. Claire is celebrating my absence from family functions, then positioning herself as the devoted wife standing by her struggling husband. The screenshot spread faster than gossip at a church potluck. People started connecting the dots, asking questions, pointing out the timeline. The comments on their posts shifted from sympathy to suspicion. Wait, wasn't he in the hospital when you posted that picnic picture? So, you were worried about him, but you didn't visit him? This is confusing. Are you supporting him or celebrating without him? The internet, bless its chaotic heart, turned on them harder than a pack of wolves on a wounded deer. Sponsors started dropping Felicity's boutique faster than she could delete comments. Clara's job put her on administrative review after someone forwarded the whole social media saga to her HR department. Robert got asked to leave a client meeting when someone brought up that viral thread about the family trying to scam their son-in-law. Their perfect facade didn't just crack, it shattered completely, right there in public view for everyone to see. And the best part, they'd done it to themselves. All I had to do was sit back and watch as their own lies caught up with them as the internet's collective detectives started working overtime as their carefully crafted victim narrative fell apart under the weight of their own contradictions. Just when I thought Clara's family had exhausted their entire playbook of manipulation tactics, the guilt trips, the financial parasitism, the legal scheming, the public reputation assassination, they decided to pull out what I can only describe as their final boss move. It was like watching someone play their last card in a poker game, except instead of a royal flush, they were holding a joker, 2 threes, and a McDonald's coupon from 1987. I should have known something was coming when my discharge from the hospital went a little too smoothly. No dramatic last-minute appearances from Clara. No tearful reconciliation attempts. No final desperate phone calls from Robert about family loyalty and forgiveness. Just blessed silence from the Martinez clan while I packed up my few hospital belongings and prepared to start my new life as a man who controlled his own finances. It was almost peaceful, which should have been my first clue that the other shoe was about to drop. The letter arrived 3 days after I got home, delivered by certified mail because apparently this required a paper trail. The return address made my blood run cold. Robert Martinez written in that old-school cursive handwriting that only men of his generation still used, like he was personally delivering a declaration of war from 1952. The envelope was thick, not just a single sheet, but multiple pages of what felt like official documentation. For a paranoid moment, I wondered if they'd found some new legal angle, some obscure law that would let them seize my assets or force me back into their financial web. But when I opened it, what I found was somehow even more psychologically twisted than any lawsuit could have been. It was a will, Robert's last will and testament, handwritten on legal letterhead and notarized like it was some kind of sacred document instead of a piece of emotional blackmail disguised as estate planning. The handwriting was shaky. Whether from age, emotion, or just the sheer effort of crafting this particular piece of manipulation, I couldn't tell. The document itself was a work of art in the worst possible way. Robert had laid out the distribution of his estate. And I use that term loosely because the man's net worth was probably somewhere between -50,000 and absolutely all, with the precision of someone dividing up the crown jewels instead of a suburban house that was already in foreclosure and a 2003 Honda with a check engine light that had been on since Obama's first term. But here's where it gets interesting. According to this newly drafted will, all remaining assets, the house they'd lost, the cars they couldn't afford, the imaginary inheritance that existed only in Robert's delusional mind, would go to the family members who maintained unity during times of crisis and stood together when others chose division. Family members who maintained unity, let that sink in for a minute. In Robert's mind, enabling his family's financial irresponsibility was maintaining unity while setting boundaries, and refusing to be their personal ATM was choosing division. It was like living in some alternate reality where up was down, black was white, and fiscal responsibility was a character flaw. But the real kicker, the part that made me laugh so hard I nearly gave myself another cardiac event, was the final paragraph written in ink that looked darker than the rest, like he'd pressed down extra hard to make sure his point was crystal clear. Until such time as he returns to the family and seeks proper reconciliation for the pain and division he has caused, my son-in-law shall receive nothing from this estate. Blood is thicker than water, but family unity is thicker than blood. When he chooses love over pride, he will be welcomed back into the fold with open arms and open hearts, returns to the family, seeks proper reconciliation. The pain and division he had caused. This was actually trying to make it sound like I was the one who abandoned them, like I was some prodigal son who'd wandered off and needed to come crawling back home with my tail between my legs and my checkbook in my hand. The beautiful irony was that Robert was trying to use inheritance as bait, the promise of future wealth to draw me back into their orbit. Except there was no wealth. The house was gone, foreclosed on because they'd been gambling with the mortgage payments. The cars were probably getting repossessed as I read his delusional document. Robert's estate consisted of debt, broken dreams, and a collection of get-rich schemes that had never quite panned out. He was offering me nothing and calling it everything. He was dangling an empty carrot in front of a donkey who'd finally figured out he could walk away from the stick entirely. I read the whole thing twice just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating from leftover cardiac medication. Nope, it was real. Robert had actually sat down, probably at that same kitchen table where they'd planned their guardianship scheme, and carefully crafted a document designed to make me feel like I was missing out on some grand inheritance if I didn't come crawling back to finance their lifestyle. The timing was perfect, too. This wasn't some document he'd had lying around for years. The date was fresh, written just days after their social media campaign had imploded in their faces. When the crying videos didn't work, when the public shaming backfired, when their reputation lay in tatters across the internet, Robert had decided to try one last manipulation. The promise of wealth that didn't exist, conditional on my return to financial servitude. It was like watching someone try to sell you a bridge they didn't own with money they didn't have, while standing in a river they couldn't cross. The sheer audacity was almost admirable. If you could separate it from the complete moral bankruptcy that made it possible. I called Elias because at this point he'd become my unofficial advisor on all things related to Martinez's family insanity and read him the will over the phone. The silence that followed was so long I thought the call had dropped. "Grandpa, you still there?" "Son," he said finally, his voice carrying that particular mixture of amusement and disgust that only comes from witnessing something truly spectacular in its awfulness. "That man is trying to bribe you with nothing and call it something. So what do? You do exactly what you've been doing. You walk away. You let them keep their imaginary inheritance and their conditional love and their family unity that only exists when someone else is paying for it. But I knew there was more to it than just walking away. This will, this final manipulation, this last desperate attempt to make me feel like I was missing out on something valuable, it needed a response. Not the response they were hoping for, not a tearful phone call begging to be welcomed back into the family fold, but something that would make it crystal clear that their psychological games were over. That's when I made the call that would end this once and for all. Not to Robert, not to Clara, not to any of them. I called my lawyer and told him I wanted to file a permanent no-contact order against the entire Martinez family. No more phone calls, no more letters, no more certified mail documents full of manipulation, disguised as legal paperwork. For the first time in 8 years of marriage, I was cutting the last tie. I didn't want Robert's inheritance. I didn't want their conditional love. I didn't want their family unity that only existed when I was writing the checks. I wanted freedom. And finally, I was willing to pay the price for it. The day I walked out of St. Mary's Hospital for the last time, Elias was waiting for me in the parking lot with his ancient Toyota Camry. The kind of car that looks like it was built during the Carter administration, but runs like it could outlast a nuclear winter. No fanfare, no dramatic music, no movie moment where everything suddenly makes sense. Just an old man in a worn leather jacket, leaning against a car that had seen better decades, ready to drive me toward whatever came next. "You ready for this?" he asked, loading my pathetic collection of hospital belongings into his trunk. A plastic bag full of get-well cards from coworkers who barely knew me. Some clothes that smelled like antiseptic and broken dreams. And a folder full of legal documents that officially severed every tie between me and the people who'd spent 8 years treating me like their personal piggy bank. Ready as someone can be for starting over at 35 with nothing but a cardiac event and a newfound understanding of how shitty people can be. Elias chuckled and started the car, which made the kind of noise that suggested it was held together by prayer and spite, but somehow kept running anyway. "Son, you're not starting over with nothing. You're starting over without the wrong people. That's not the same thing." We drove past the city, past the suburbs where Claire and I had lived in our perfect little house with our perfect little mortgage and our perfectly up relationship, past the strip malls and chain restaurants and all the familiar landmarks of a life I was leaving behind like a snake shedding its skin. The further we got from civilization, the easier it became to breathe. Like the air itself was getting cleaner as we put distance between me and the disaster zone my marriage had become. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, watching the landscape change from suburban sprawl to actual trees and open space. It had been so long since I'd seen anything that wasn't concrete or asphalt that I'd almost forgotten what real nature looked like. "Place I found online," Elias said, navigating country roads like he'd been driving them his whole life. Little cabin up in the mountains. Owner's looking to sell, but he's willing to rent it month to month while you figure things out. No neighbors close enough to borrow sugar from. No homeowners association telling you what color you can paint your mailbox. No drama for miles around the mountains. I'd forgotten that places like this even existed. Places where your biggest concern was whether you had enough firewood for the winter instead of whether your sister-in-law was going to drain your business account to pay for her latest entrepreneurial fantasy. Places where silence was actually silent instead of filled with the constant buzz of anxiety and obligation and other people's emergencies. The cabin turned out to be everything Elias had promised and nothing like what I'd been expecting. It wasn't some luxury mountain retreat with granite countertops and a hot tub. It was just a simple, honest building that had been built to serve a purpose instead of to impress anyone. Log walls that had weathered decades of mountain winters. A front porch that looked like it had been designed for sitting and thinking rather than posing for Instagram photos. Windows that faced east toward the sunrise instead of toward the neighbor's judgment. Jesus, I said, getting out of the car and actually feeling my shoulders relax for the first time in months. It's perfect. Owner's name is Bill, Elias said, pulling my bags out of the trunk. Retired park ranger. Lost his wife last year. Decided he wanted to move closer to his kids in Florida. Says the place has good energy, whatever the hell that means. But he seemed like good people when I talked to him on the phone. Good people. I'd almost forgotten what that phrase meant after spending so many years surrounded by people who were very good at seeming good while slowly poisoning everything they touched. But standing there on that porch, looking out at mountains that couldn't be manipulated or guilt into providing money they didn't have, I started to remember what peace felt like. The inside of the cabin was just as honest as the outside. Hardwood floors that showed their age without apologizing for it. A stone fireplace that had clearly been used for actual warmth instead of just decoration. Furniture that prioritized comfort over style. The kitchen was small but functional. The kind of place where you could make real food instead of just heating up whatever you'd grab from the drive-thru between working overtime to pay other people's bills. But the best part, the part that made me understand why Elias had driven 3 hours to find this place, was the silence. Not the oppressive silence of people who aren't talking to each other. Not the tense silence of waiting for the next crisis to explode, but actual honest-to-God peaceful silence. The kind of quiet where you could hear yourself think for the first time in years. I talked to that tech company you applied to before all this went down, Elias said, settling into an armchair that looked like it had been broken in by decades of good conversations. They're still interested and they're fine with you working remote. 40 hours a week instead of the 60 you were pulling before, better benefits, and nobody expects you to be available for emergencies at 3 o'clock in the morning. 40 hours a week. I'd forgotten that was even possible. For years, I'd been working every available hour, taking on extra projects and overtime shifts. Not because I loved my job, but because someone always needed money for something. Felicity's boutique inventory, Robert's home improvement disasters, Clara's shopping habits that seemed to expand to fill whatever budget was available. I'd been living like a hamster on a wheel, running faster and faster to keep up with other people's spending. The salary is less than what you were making, Elias continued. But when you're not supporting 4 other adults and their various catastrophes, you'd be surprised how far money can stretch. That first night in the cabin, I sat on the front porch and watched the sun set behind mountains that had been there long before my marriage and would be there long after Clara had moved on to her next victim. I made dinner in a kitchen that was mine, in a house where nobody expected me to solve their problems or finance their dreams or apologize for having boundaries. For the first time in 8 years, I went to sleep without setting 17 alarms or making mental lists of whose crisis I'd need to handle the next day. I just slept like a normal human being who wasn't responsible for everyone else's happiness and financial security. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight was streaming through windows that faced the mountains instead of the neighbor's drama, and I could hear birds instead of text message notifications demanding immediate attention and financial assistance. Elias was already up sitting on the porch with coffee and the newspaper, reading like someone who had all the time in the world because he'd learned the difference between urgent and important sometime around 1987. "Morning," I said, joining him on the porch with my own cup of coffee. Real coffee, not the emergency caffeine I'd been surviving on for years. Sleep good like the dead, which considering recent events, probably isn't the best analogy. He laughed, and the sound carried across the mountains like it belonged there, like peace was something you could hear when you got far enough away from the people who confused love with exploitation. 6 months into my new life, I developed what you might call a routine. If routines could be built around the radical concept of not giving a damn about other people's manufactured emergencies. I woke up when my body felt like waking up instead of when my phone started buzzing with demands for immediate financial assistance. I drank my coffee while watching the sunrise paint the mountains different shades of gold and purple instead of scrolling through text messages about whose rent was due or which bill had gone into collections this week. It was glorious. The remote job had turned out to be everything Elias had promised and more. 40 hours a week of actual work instead of 60 hours of work plus 20 hours of crisis management for people who confused poor planning with bad luck. My new colleagues treated me like a professional instead of a human ATM. And my boss had this crazy idea that work-life balance was actually important for productivity. Revolutionary stuff really. But the best part wasn't the job or the mountains or even the cabin that had become more of a home in 6 months than the house I'd shared with Clara had been in 8 years. The best part was the silence in my head. For the first time since I gotten married, I wasn't constantly calculating who needed what money when. Wasn't mentally juggling payment schedules and credit limits and emergency funds for other people's poor decisions. That's not to say Clara's family had given up entirely. Oh no, these people had the persistence of cockroaches and about the same level of shame. Every few weeks, someone would test the boundaries of the no-contact order like they were probing for weaknesses in a fortress wall. Usually, it came through distant relatives who'd been recruited as flying monkeys. Cousin Patricia would call to chat about family news and somehow work in a mention of how devastated Clara was about our separation. Uncle Mike would send a Facebook message asking if I'd heard about Robert's latest health scare. Nothing serious, just a convenient excuse to reach out and remind me that family was important. Clara's college roommate would leave a voicemail about how worried she was about both of us and how maybe we could all get together for coffee to work things out. The manipulation was so transparent, it would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. These people had turned guilt tripping into an art form, and they were throwing everything they had at the wall to see what would stick. The health scares, the financial emergencies, the carefully worded updates about how much they missed me and wanted me back in their lives. It was like watching a master class in emotional blackmail taught by people who'd never quite grasped that their student had graduated and moved on. My personal favorite was the Christmas card that somehow made it past my mail screening. A beautiful family photo. Clara, Felicity, Robert, Margaret, all gathered around a perfectly decorated tree in what looked like someone else's living room since they'd lost their house. Everyone was smiling, those forced holiday smiles that probably took 47 takes to get right. And the caption inside read, "Wishing you peace. Enjoy this holiday season. You're always in our thoughts and prayers. Love the Martinez family." The Martinez family like they were some kind of brand instead of a collection of individuals who'd spent years treating me like their personal financial planning service. The audacity was breathtaking. Really, they'd literally tried to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal my money, and now they were sending me Christmas cards about love and prayers. I showed the card to Elias, who'd taken to spending most evenings on my porch reading books and offering commentary on the various attempts to breach my psychological defenses. He looked at it for about 10 seconds, chuckled, and handed it back. "You know what this is, don't you?" he said, desperation disguised as holiday cheer bait. "They're fishing, seeing if you'll bite. Seeing if maybe enough time has passed that you've forgotten why you left in the first place." But here's the thing. I hadn't forgotten. If anything, the distance had given me perspective on just how toxic that whole situation had been. Living without constant demands for money had shown me what financial security actually felt like. Sleeping through the night without worrying about whose crisis would wake me up next had reminded me what peace was supposed to be. Having conversations that weren't thinly veiled requests for financial assistance had helped me remember what actual human connection looked like. The latest attempt had come just last week, delivered through Clara's therapist of all people. Apparently, Clara had been seeing someone to work through the trauma of her marriage ending because being cut off from someone else's bank account was apparently traumatic now, and the therapist had suggested that closure might be helpful for both of us. The therapist had called me directly, which should have been my first red flag. Professional boundaries aren't really that flexible, and therapists don't usually cold call their patients' arranged spouses to suggest family reunification sessions. But apparently, Clara had painted such a convincing picture of our marriage falling apart due to my health crisis and untreated trauma that this woman genuinely believed she was helping. "I understand you've been through a difficult time," the therapist had said. Her voice carrying that particular blend of professional concern and personal judgment that only comes from getting one side of a very complicated story. "Clara has been working very hard to understand her role in the breakdown of your relationship. And she's made significant progress in therapy. She's hoping that you might be willing to participate in a joint session to work toward healing and closure." Healing and closure, right? Because nothing says healing quite like sitting in a room with someone who'd spent years financially exploiting you while a therapist who'd only heard their version of events tried to facilitate a reconciliation that would inevitably end with me writing checks again. I politely declined, explaining that I'd found my closure in the mountains and didn't need any additional healing beyond the kind that came from not being treated like a human credit card. The therapist had seemed genuinely surprised, like she couldn't understand why I wouldn't want to repair a relationship with someone who tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. But that's the beautiful thing about peace. Once you've actually experienced it, it becomes pretty easy to recognize all the things that threaten it. And Clara's family, with their manufactured emergencies and conditional love and expert-level manipulation skills, represented the exact opposite of everything I'd built for myself in these mountains. So, I deleted the voicemails without listening to them. I threw away the cards without reading them. I blocked the numbers and emails and social media accounts. And when new ones popped up, I blocked those, too. Because here's what I'd learned in 6 months of actual peace. You don't negotiate with emotional terrorists. You don't engage with people who confuse love with exploitation. And you sure as hell don't feel guilty about protecting the life you've built from people who want to tear it down for their own benefit. They could keep their story. They could tell anyone who'd listen about the heartless husband who'd abandoned his family during their time of need. They could play the victim until the end of time, posting their carefully curated tales of woe on social media and collecting sympathy from people who didn't know the whole truth. I had something better than their story. I had the truth. And the truth had given me peace. And peace, it turned out, was worth more than being loved by people who only loved me when I was useful.
That brings this story to an end, and that one was definitely a wild ride. Let me know what you think in the comments. Now, let's move into the next story, titled,
For the first 6 weeks after our marriage, my wife avoided all intimate contact. Not a single touch. When I confronted her about it, she stated, "My body is my choice. You can't demand anything." So, I initiated annulment proceedings via legal system. What happened then? Shocked absolutely everyone. So, here's the thing about marriage that nobody warns you about in those cheesy rom-coms or self-help books your well-meaning aunt shoves into your hands at family gatherings. They tell you about compromise, about communication, about finding your person. What they don't tell you is what happens when your person turns out to be a complete stranger who apparently signed up for a different contract than you did. My name is Marcus Ellison, and let me tell you, I thought I knew what I was getting into when I said I do. Turns out I was about as prepared for married life as a goldfish is for a triathlon. 6 weeks. That's how long it took for my fairy tale wedding to turn into what I can only describe as the world's most expensive roommate situation. 6 weeks of sleeping next to someone who acted like I had some kind of contagious disease that could be transmitted through casual contact. 6 weeks of trying to hold my wife's hand only to have her pull away like I just emerged from a nuclear waste facility. 6 weeks of stolen glances across the breakfast table while she scrolled through her phone like I was part of the furniture and not even the good furniture. More like that weird decorative chair that nobody actually sits in but keeps around because it adds character to the room. Clara Whitmore. Well, Clara Ellison now, though she seemed to forget that part most days, had transformed from the woman I fell head over heels for into someone I barely recognized during our whirlwind courtship. She couldn't keep her hands off me. We'd spend hours talking about our future, our dreams, the life we were going to build together in our beautiful home with a white picket fence and maybe a golden retriever named something ridiculously wholesome like Buddy or Scout. She'd curl up against me during movies, trace patterns on my chest while we lay in bed talking until sunrise, laugh at my terrible jokes like I was the next Dave Chappelle. Hell, she even laughed at my impression of my uptight business partner, Jerry, which was honestly pretty generous because even I knew it was garbage. But the moment we got back from our honeymoon in Tuscany, which by the way, she spent more time photographing for her Instagram than actually enjoying, it was like someone had flipped a switch. Suddenly, every attempt at physical affection was met with the kind of recoil you'd expect if I'd suggested we take up competitive snake charming. A kiss goodnight. She'd turn her head at the last second, offering me her cheek like I was her elderly great-uncle at a family reunion, trying to put my arm around her while we watched Netflix. She'd suddenly remember she needed to organize her skincare routine or respond to some urgent emails that apparently couldn't wait until morning. The worst part wasn't even the rejection itself. I mean, nobody likes getting shot down, but I'm a grown man. I can handle a little disappointment. The worst part was the way she looked at me when I tried, like I was being unreasonable, like I was some kind of perverted creep for expecting physical intimacy with my own wife. The same woman who used to send me flirty texts during my board meetings was now treating me like I was asking for her kidney instead of a simple hug. I tried everything, and I mean everything. I bought flowers, the expensive ones from that pretentious florist downtown that charges $50 for what you can get at the grocery store for $10. I planned romantic dinners complete with candles that cost more than most people's monthly coffee budget and wine that I had to Google to make sure I was pronouncing correctly. I even tried the whole surprise weekend getaway thing, booking us into this swanky bed and breakfast in Aspen that looked like something out of a magazine spread. Her response, "I'm not really in the mood for traveling right now, Marcus. Can't we just stay home and relax?" Relaxing, apparently, meant her in one corner of our king-sized bed, a bed we picked out together, laughing about how ridiculously large it was for two people, while I occupied the other corner like we were observing some kind of medieval social distancing protocol. The gap between us might as well have been the Grand Canyon for all the good it did me. I started to wonder if maybe I'd developed some kind of mysterious body odor that only she could detect, or if I'd somehow offended her family during the wedding reception without realizing it. Maybe I'd made some cultural faux pas, or mispronounced something important, or committed some unforgivable breach of etiquette that had turned me into persona non grata in my own marriage. But the breaking point came on a Tuesday night in November. I remember it was Tuesday because that was the night we used to order Thai food and binge-watch whatever crime documentary series was trending on Netflix. It was our thing, our little tradition that had carried over from our dating days. Except now, even our Tuesday nights felt like a business meeting between two people who barely tolerated each other's presence. I'd been building up the courage all week to have the conversation. You know, the one where you ask your spouse why they're treating you like you're radioactive. So there I was, sitting on our ridiculously expensive Italian leather couch that Clara had insisted we needed for the living room, watching her pick her pad thai while scrolling through her phone for the millionth time that evening. The documentary was playing in the background. Something about a serial killer who collected vintage teacups, which honestly seemed less disturbing than my current domestic situation. I took a deep breath, mustered up all the courage I could find, and finally asked the question that had been eating away at me for weeks. "Clara," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable, the way they teach you in those corporate conflict resolution seminars that every company makes you sit through. "Can we talk about us? About what's been going on between us lately?" She looked up from her phone with the kind of expression you'd give someone who just asked you to explain quantum physics using only interpretive dance. "What do you mean?" she asked, though we both knew exactly what I meant. The woman was many things, but stupid wasn't one of them. "I mean," I continued, feeling like I was negotiating a hostile takeover instead of talking to my wife. "We haven't been intimate at all since the wedding, and I'm just wondering if there's something I've done wrong, or if you're going through something, or if we need to." That's when she hit me with the line that would replay in my head for months afterward. She looked me straight in the eye with the kind of cold, calculated stare that would make a poker player jealous and said, "My body is my choice, Marcus. You can't demand anything from me. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm all for bodily autonomy. I've got a sister. I've got female friends. I understand consent and respect and all that good stuff that should be basic human decency, but apparently needs to be spelled out these days. But there's a difference between respecting someone's boundaries and feeling like you're married to a roommate who finds you personally offensive." Her words weren't just cold. They were surgical, precise, like she'd been practicing them in the mirror, waiting for just the right moment to deploy them for maximum impact. That night, lying in bed next to someone who felt like a complete stranger, I knew with absolute certainty that something was fundamentally irreparably wrong with our marriage. This wasn't about adjustment periods or newlywed jitters or any of the other explanations I'd been feeding myself for weeks. This was something else entirely. Something that made my skin crawl and my gut twist with a feeling I couldn't quite name yet. Something that would eventually turn my entire world upside down and teach me that sometimes the person you think you know best is actually the person you don't know at all. You know how they say hindsight is 20/20? Well, let me tell you, looking back at how Clara and I started is like watching a horror movie where you're screaming at the protagonist not to go into the creepy basement, except I'm the idiot protagonist. And the creepy basement was apparently my entire relationship. But at the time, man, I thought I'd hit the romantic jackpot. I was like a kid who'd found a $20 bill on the sidewalk and couldn't believe his luck, completely oblivious to the fact that it might be part of some elaborate prank. It all started at the Hartwell Foundation charity gala in Denver. You know, one of those black tie affairs where rich people pretend to care about causes while writing checks that are basically tax write-offs with a side of social media bragging rights. I wasn't even supposed to be there, honestly. My business partner, Jerry, had come down with what he claimed was food poisoning, but what I suspected was a case of, "My wife wants to binge watch The Real Housewives, and I'd rather eat glass than make small talk with Denver's elite for 4 hours." So, there I was, flying solo in a tux that cost more than most people's monthly rent, nursing an overpriced whiskey, and trying not to look like the social disaster I actually am at these things. That's when I heard it. This laugh that was like music but not the pretentious classical stuff they were playing in the background. More like your favorite song on the radio when you're having the best day of your life. I'm not usually the type to get all poetic about sounds, but this laugh made me turn around so fast I nearly spilled my drink on some society matron who probably would have had me banned from every charity event in Colorado for the next decade. And there she was, Clara Whitmore, though I didn't know her name yet. Just this absolutely stunning woman in a midnight blue dress that probably cost more than my first car, surrounded by a group of people who were all laughing along with her like she was the most fascinating person in the room, which honestly she might have been. She had this way of commanding attention without seeming to try. Like she was born knowing secrets that the rest of us were still trying to figure out. Her hair was this perfect shade of honey blonde that caught the light just right. And when she smiled, it was like someone had cranked up the brightness setting on the entire room. I stood there like an absolute for probably 5 full minutes, just watching her work the crowd. She'd lean in when someone was talking, like whatever they were saying was the most important thing she'd ever heard. She'd touch people's arms when she laughed, not in a flirty way, but in this warm, connected way that made everyone around her feel special. It was like watching a master class in human interaction. And I was definitely the remedial student taking notes from the back of the room. Eventually, my brain managed to override my social anxiety long enough to actually approach her. I used some lame line about the charity being close to my heart, which wasn't even a lie since my company had been supporting youth education programs for years, and she didn't just smile politely and move on like I expected. She actually engaged, asked me thoughtful questions about our programs, shared stories about her own volunteer work with literacy initiatives, made me feel like I was the most interesting guy at the party instead of just another businessman in an expensive suit. We ended up talking for the rest of the evening. I missed the keynote speech, the silent auction, probably half the networking opportunities one was supposed to be capitalizing on, and I didn't give a damn. Clara had this way of making everything else fade into the background. She was smart, funny, passionate about causes that actually mattered, and she seemed genuinely interested in me as a person rather than just another potential connection or business opportunity. When she laughed at my stories, and I mean really laughed, not that polite social you do when someone's trying too hard, I felt like I could conquer the world. By the time the evening was winding down, I'd worked up enough courage to ask for her number. She gave it to me without hesitation along with a smile that made me feel like I'd just won the lottery. "I'd love to continue this conversation sometime," she said. And I swear I floated home that night like some lovesick teenager who'd just gotten asked to prom by the homecoming queen. Our first official date was at this little Italian place in Cherry Creek that she'd recommended. "Nothing too fancy," she said. "Just good food and better conversation." She showed up looking effortlessly beautiful in jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, but somehow made her look approachable instead of intimidating. We talked for 3 hours straight, covering everything from travel dreams to childhood embarrassments to our thoughts on whether pineapple belonged on pizza. We agreed it was an abomination, which I took as a sign we were meant to be. The months that followed were like something out of a romantic comedy, except better because it was actually happening to me. Clara would surprise me at my office with lunch from my favorite deli, complete with those little notes written in her perfect handwriting that I kept in my desk drawer like some kind of sentimental fool. We'd spend entire weekends exploring Denver, hiking in Red Rocks, browsing through bookshops in Capitol Hill, trying new restaurants that she'd found in whatever foodie blog she was obsessed with that week. She had this infectious curiosity about everything. This way of making ordinary activities feel like adventures. She was affectionate in all the ways that mattered. She'd grab my hand when we were walking down the street, curl up against me during movies, send me flirty texts during the day that made me smile like an idiot during board meetings. When we'd go out with my friends, she'd slip her arm through mine and actually participate in conversations instead of checking her phone every 5 minutes like she had somewhere better to be. My buddy Adrian, who's usually about as romantic as a tax audit, actually pulled me aside one night and said, "Dude, I've never seen you this happy. She's good for you." Even my mother approved. And Evelyn Ellison is not easily impressed by the women I date. She'd made it clear over the years that she thought most of my girlfriends were either gold diggers or airheads, sometimes both. But when I brought Clara home for Sunday dinner, Mom actually smiled. Not her polite, "I'm trying to be welcoming" smile, but her genuine "I like this person" smile that I hadn't seen directed at one of my dates since well ever. Clara helped with the dishes, asked about Mom's garden, and somehow managed to make my usually reserved mother laugh until she was wiping tears from her eyes. After Clara left that night, Mom grabbed my arm and said, "That one's a keeper, Marcus. Don't screw it up." By the time I proposed, 6 months later, on the balcony of the same hotel where we'd had our first real date, I was absolutely certain I'd found my person. The ring was a 2-carat solitaire that had set me back more than my first car. But seeing her face when I got down on one knee made every penny worth it. She said yes before I even finished my carefully rehearsed speech, threw her arms around me, and kissed me like her life depended on it. We were both crying and laughing at the same time. And I remember thinking that this was what happiness actually felt like. This overwhelming sense of rightness, like all the pieces of my life had finally clicked into place. The wedding planning was a whirlwind of decisions about flowers and venues and guest lists. But Clara threw herself into it with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything else. She wanted everything to be perfect. Not in a bridezilla way, but in a "this is the most important day of our lives. And I want it to be beautiful" way. We settled on the Highlands Country Club because it had this gorgeous ballroom with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the mountains. And Clara said she wanted our guests to be able to see how beautiful Colorado was while they celebrated with us. The ceremony itself was everything we dreamed of. Clara looked absolutely radiant in her dress. This stunning creation that her mother had helped her pick out with delicate lace sleeves and a train that seemed to go on forever. When she walked down the aisle, I literally forgot how to breathe for a second. She was glowing with happiness, practically floating toward me. And when she reached the altar and took my hands, she whispered, "I can't believe we're actually doing this." With this huge smile that made me fall in love with her all over again. The reception was perfect, too. Great food, amazing music, and a dance floor packed with people celebrating our happily ever after. Clara's family had spared no expense, and combined with what my parents contributed, we'd managed to throw the kind of party that people would be talking about for years. During our first dance, Clara looked up at me and said, "I love you so much, Marcus. I can't wait to start our real life together." Looking back now, those words take on a completely different meaning than they had at the time. But in that moment, surrounded by everyone we loved, dancing to It Last by Ada James, while our photographer captured what I thought would be the beginning of our beautiful story, I believed every single word. I believed in us, in our future, in the life we were going to build in our beautiful home with its perfectly appointed rooms and carefully curated furniture. I believed that the woman in my arms was exactly who she seemed to be, and that our love story was just getting started. What an absolute fool I was. If you've ever watched one of those nature documentaries where they show you a perfectly normal-look log floating in a swamp and then suddenly it opens its eyes and reveals itself to be a 12-foot alligator that's been waiting to devour some unsuspecting deer, you'll understand exactly what living with Clara became like after our honeymoon. Except in this case, I was the deer and I was apparently too stupid to notice that my log had developed teeth. The changes started small. The kind of stuff that you tell yourself is just normal adjustment period nonsense. Everyone warned me that the first year of marriage was tough, right? Your bachelor friends shake their heads knowingly and mutter things like, "Welcome to the ball and chain, buddy." While your married buddies pat you on the back and say cryptic like, "You'll figure it out," with a kind of smile that doesn't quite reach their eyes. So when Clara started acting a little different, I chalked it up to post-wedding blues or maybe just the stress of combining two lives into one perfectly coordinated domestic unit. But then the different became downright bizarre and I started to feel like I was living with some kind of pod person who had stolen my wife's face but forgotten to download her personality. Clara developed routines that made absolutely no sense to anyone with half a brain cell. She'd disappear for hours at a time with no explanation beyond, "I have errands to run" or "I'm meeting a friend for lunch." Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not some controlling psychopath who needs to know his wife's whereabouts every second of the day. But when your spouse leaves at 10 o'clock in the morning saying she's going to grab groceries and doesn't come back until 8 at night with nothing but a single bag of organic kale and a story about traffic, that would make a soap opera writer cringe. You start to wonder if maybe she's got a second job as a CIA operative or something. Her phone became like some kind of sacred artifact that mere mortals weren't allowed to touch. Before the wedding, we used to play that stupid game where you try to guess each other's passcodes, and she'd hand me her phone to show me funny videos or cute animal memes that she found on Instagram. Now, the thing was locked down tighter than Fort Knox, and she guarded it like it contained state secrets. She'd get visibly tense if I walked by while she was texting, tilting the screen away from me like I was trying to peek at her diary. One time, I jokingly asked if she was planning my surprise birthday party on there, and she gave me this look that could have frozen hell over and said, "Something should be private, Marcus." The weirdest part was how she seemed to physically relax whenever I left the house. I started noticing it by accident. I'd forget my wallet or my keys and have to double back, only to catch glimpses of her through the window, sprawled out on the couch, looking completely at ease, scrolling through her phone with this little smile on her face that I hadn't seen directed at me in weeks. The second I walked back through the door, though, it was like someone had flipped a switch. The smile would disappear, her shoulders would tense up, and she'd suddenly remember urgent tasks that required her immediate attention in rooms that were as far away from me as possible. I tried everything I could think of to fix whatever was broken between us. I suggested date nights, weekend trips, Couples activities that we used to love doing together. Her response was always the same, polite refusal wrapped in perfectly reasonable excuses. I'm really tired this week, Marcus. Can we maybe do something next weekend? Next weekend would come and go with the same script, like we were stuck in some kind of Groundhog Day loop where I was the only one who remembered that we used to actually enjoy each other's company. The counseling suggestion went over about as well as you'd expect. I brought it up on a Sunday morning while we were having what I generously called breakfast together, though it was more like two strangers who happened to be eating cereal in the same kitchen. I'd been building up to it for days, trying to figure out how to frame it in a way that didn't sound like I was accusing her of being fundamentally broken as a human being. Clara, I said, trying to keep my voice light and non-threatening. I've been thinking maybe we should try talking to someone, like a marriage counselor or therapist, just to help us figure out how to connect better. She looked up from her Greek yogurt with this expression that was equal parts amusement and disdain, like I just suggested we take up competitive yodeling or join a circus. Then she laughed. Not the beautiful musical laugh that had first caught my attention at that charity gala, but this bitter sharp sound that made me feel like I just told the world's worst joke. We don't need therapy, Marcus, she said. Her voice dripping with the kind of condescension usually reserved for explaining basic concepts to particularly slow children. You just need to respect boundaries. Not everything has to be analyzed and fixed. Some things just are what they are. That's when I knew I needed to talk to someone who wasn't slowly driving me insane. Adrian Cole had been my best friend since college. The kind of guy who would tell you if you had spinach in your teeth or if your girlfriend was obviously cheating on you, even if you didn't want to hear it. He was also happily married to Sarah, who was basically the female version of him. Smart, funny, and brutally honest when the situation called for it. If anyone could give me perspective on what the hell was happening in my own house, it was Adrian. I met him for beers at Murphy's Pub on a Thursday night. The kind of dive bar where the peanut shells on the floor are part of the ambience and nobody judges you for drinking your feelings. Adrian took one look at my face and ordered us both double whissies instead of our usual IPAs. Dude, he said, settling into the worn leather booth across from me. You look like someone ran over your dog. What's going on? So, I told him everything. The lack of intimacy, the mysterious disappearances, the phone guarding, the way she seemed to barely tolerate my presence in our own home. Adrian listened without interrupting, nursing his whiskey and occasionally nodding like he was taking mental notes. When I finished my pathetic tale of marital woe, he was quiet for a long moment, staring into his glass like it might contain the secrets of the universe. Marcus, he finally said, looking up at me with the kind of serious expression that made my stomach clench. This isn't normal newlywed stuff. Sarah and I went through some adjustment period when we got married, but this sounds like she's actively trying to avoid being married to you, like at all. He leaned forward, lowering his voice, even though the bar was loud enough that nobody could have overheard us anyway. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. Do you think Clara actually wanted to marry you, or do you think she wanted to marry what you represent, your money, your status, your connections? The question hit me like a punch to the gut because it was the same thought that had been creeping around the edges of my mind for weeks. The possibility I'd been desperately trying not to acknowledge. But hearing it out loud from someone whose judgment I trusted implicitly made it impossible to ignore. Even my mother had started making comments. And Evelyn Ellison was not the type to stick her nose into her adult son's marriage unless something was seriously wrong. During our last visit, she'd pulled me aside while Clara was supposedly freshening up in the bathroom. Though given how long she was taking, she might have been performing minor surgery in there. Marcus, honey, Mom had said. Her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was trying to be diplomatic, but was really just barely restraining herself from saying what she actually thought. Is everything okay between you and Clara? She seems distant, like she's here physically, but mentally she's somewhere else entirely. When I tried to brush it off as normal married life stuff, Mom had given me that look. The one that said she wasn't buying my for even half a second. She looks at you like you're a roommate, not her husband, she'd whispered, glancing toward the bathroom to make sure Clara wasn't coming back. And not even a roommate she particularly likes. Sitting there in Murphy's Pub with Adrian, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of other people's ordinary Thursday night problems, I finally admitted out loud what I'd been trying not to think about for weeks. My marriage was a complete disaster, and I had no idea how to fix it. Worse, I was starting to suspect that maybe it couldn't be fixed because you can't repair something that was broken from the very beginning. The scariest part wasn't even the possibility that my wife didn't love me. The scariest part was the growing suspicion that she never had and that I'd been such a naive, lovesick fool, that I'd completely missed all the warning signs that were probably flashing like neon lights for everyone else to see. You know that moment in every disaster movie where the hero finally stops trying to reason with the tornado or negotiate with the earthquake and just accepts that nature is trying to kill them. Well, welcome to my Tuesday night epiphany, brought to you by another spectacular fight about intimacy and the sudden realization that I was married to a human-shaped hurricane who had apparently enrolled in advanced courses on emotional destruction. It started the same way these conversations always did, with me trying to approach the subject like I was defusing a bomb, while Claire acted like I was asking her to donate a kidney to a stranger she'd met on Craigslist. We'd been sitting on opposite ends of our ridiculously expensive couch, watching some Netflix show that neither of us was actually paying attention to when I made the fatal mistake of suggesting we go to bed together. Not for sex, mind you. At this point, I would have been thrilled with basic human contact that didn't involve her flinching away from me like I was radioactive. "Clara," I said, using the same careful tone I perfected for dealing with particularly volatile clients. "It's been 2 months since our wedding. 2 months since we've been close. I'm not trying to pressure you into anything, but I'm starting to feel like we're strangers living in the same house." She looked at me with that now familiar expression of barely concealed irritation, like I was a persistent salesman who couldn't take a hint. "Marcus, we've been over this. I told you that intimacy isn't something you can schedule or demand. It happens naturally or it doesn't happen at all. But it's not happening at all." I pointed out, probably with more frustration in my voice than I intended, and I'm trying to understand why. Did something happen? Did I do something wrong? Because if I did, just tell me so I can fix it. That's when she hit me with a nuclear option. She turned to face me fully, her eyes cold and calculating in a way that made my blood pressure spike, and delivered her verdict with the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. "Maybe the problem isn't what you did wrong, Marcus. Maybe the problem is that you think you're entitled to something just because we're married. Maybe the problem is that you can't accept that some women don't want to be pawns in their husband's sexual fantasies." I sat there for a moment, processing what she'd just said, feeling like I'd been slapped across the face with a frozen fish. Sexual fantasies. I'd been asking for basic human affection, not auditions for some kind of pornographic fever dream. I wanted to hold my wife's hand, maybe get a kiss that didn't feel like a punishment. Perhaps occasionally sleep in the same bed without an invisible force field between us that would make NASA jealous. "Clara," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice level despite the fact that I was pretty sure my head was about to explode. "I'm not asking for sexual fantasies. I'm asking for my wife to act like she actually wants to be married to me instead of like she's serving a prison sentence." Her response was to laugh. That same bitter sharp sound that had become the soundtrack to our marriage, and shake her head like I was missing some obvious point that everyone else in the world understood except me. "You just don't get it, do you?" she said, standing up and smoothing down her silk pajamas that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You think marriage gives you some kind of automatic access to my body, like I'm property you purchased at the altar?" And that's when something inside me finally snapped. Not in a violent throw things around the room kind of way, but in a cold crystalline moment of absolute clarity that cut through all the confusion and self-doubt I'd been wallowing in for months. I looked at this woman, this beautiful, perfectly put together woman who had somehow transformed from the love of my life into a stranger who spoke to me like I was something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe, and realized that I was done. Done begging for scraps of affection. Done apologizing for wanting a real marriage instead of whatever twisted roommate situation we'd stumbled into. Done pretending that this was normal or fixable or something that would get better with time and patience and more expensive couples therapy sessions. "You're right, Clara," I said, standing up and looking at her with what I hoped was the same cool detachment she'd been serving me for months. "I don't get it. I don't understand how the woman who couldn't keep her hands off me 6 months ago suddenly finds the idea of basic human contact so personally offensive. But you know what? I'm done trying to figure it out." I walked upstairs to our bedroom, though, let's be honest, it had basically become my bedroom since she'd taken to sleeping in the guest room more often than not, and fired up my laptop. If Clara wanted to treat our marriage like a business transaction, then maybe it was time to start thinking like a businessman instead of a lovesick fool. I'd always been good at research. It's basically half of what running a successful company involves. So, I started digging into Colorado marriage law with the same methodical approach I used for due diligence on potential acquisitions. What I found was like discovering a secret weapon I didn't even know existed. Turns out, Colorado recognizes several grounds for annulment that go way beyond the obvious stuff like bigamy or being too drunk to consent. The state actually allows in fraud, concealment, or misrepresentation at the time of marriage. And here's the kicker. If one party enters into marriage under false pretenses, never intending to fulfill the basic obligations of marriage, that constitutes fraud in the eyes of the law. I sat there staring at my laptop screen at 2 o'clock in the morning, feeling like a detective who'd just cracked the case that had been driving him insane for months. Clara's behavior wasn't just confusing or hurtful, it was potentially illegal. If she had never intended to consummate our marriage. If she had married me under false pretenses while planning to withhold the basic elements of marital intimacy, then she had essentially committed fraud. The more I researched, the more pieces started falling into place. The whirlwind courtship that had seemed so romantic now looked suspiciously like a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to get me to the altar as quickly as possible. The sudden personality change immediately after the honeymoon wasn't post-wedding blues. It was the reveal of who she actually was once she'd achieved her objective. The mysterious phone calls and unexplained absences weren't just quirky married life adjustments. They were signs of someone who was living a completely different life than the one she'd signed up for on paper. I printed out page after page of legal precedents, case studies, and statutory requirements, building a file that grew thicker by the hour. There were cases where marriages had been annulled after just a few months because one party had never intended to fulfill their marital obligations. There were precedents for fraud claims based on deliberate misrepresentation during courtship. There were even criminal cases where individuals had been prosecuted for marriage fraud in situations that sounded disturbingly similar to my own. By the time the sun came up, I had a plan. Not a plan to save my marriage. That ship had sailed sometime around Clara's lecture about sexual fantasies and property ownership, but a plan to get out of this disaster with my dignity and my finances intact. If Clara wanted to play games, then game on. But she was about to discover that I was a lot better at this particular sport than she'd given me credit for. The weird thing was how calm I felt once I'd made the decision. For months, I'd been tying myself in knots trying to figure out how to fix something that was apparently broken by design. I'd been beating myself up, wondering what I'd done wrong, questioning my own sanity and self-worth. But now that I understood what was really happening, that I wasn't failing as a husband so much as I was succeeding as a mark in some kind of elaborate con game, everything suddenly made perfect sense. Clara had played me like a fiddle. But the song was about to end. And unlike the fairy tale she'd sold me during our courtship, this story wasn't going to end with happily ever after. It was going to end with legal documents, court dates, and the kind of justice that only comes when you stop trying to fix what was never real in the first place. I closed my laptop, took a shower, put on my best suit, and prepared to go to war, because that's what this was now. Not a marriage, not even a relationship, but a battle. And I'll be damned if I was going to lose. Finding the right lawyer is a lot like dating, except instead of wondering if someone will ghost you after dinner, you're wondering if they'll ghost you after taking your retainer and leaving you high and dry in a courtroom full of people who speak fluent legal jargon while you're still trying to figure out what the hell a motion to compel actually means. Lucky for me, I'd done my homework with the same obsessive thoroughness that had made my business successful, which is probably the only reason I didn't end up with some ambulance chaser who advertised on late-night TV between commercials for miracle weight loss supplements and get-rich schemes. Patricia Henley came recommended by 3 different sources, all of whom used words like ruthless, brilliant, and the kind of lawyer you want on your side when the hit's the fan. Her office was located in one of those sleek downtown Denver high-rises that screams, "We charge by the minute and our minutes are expensive," which honestly made me feel a little better about what I was about to spend. If you're going to pay premium prices for legal representation, you want it to at least look like you're getting premium service, not like you're meeting your attorney in the back booth of a Denny's at midnight. The waiting room was all glass and steel and leather furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars, with abstract art on the walls that looked like someone had sneezed paint on a canvas and called it genius. The receptionist, a woman who looked like she could run a Fortune 500 company in her spare time, offered me coffee that came in actual china cups instead of those flimsy paper things you get at most offices. These were clearly people who understood that presentation matters, especially when you're about to discuss the intimate details of your catastrophic marriage with a complete stranger. Patricia Henley herself was exactly what central casting would order if they needed someone to play intimidating female attorney in a legal thriller. She was probably in her late 40s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a style that said, "I don't have time for bullshit." Wearing a suit that looked like it had been tailored by someone who charged more per hour than most people make in a week. When she shook my hand, her grip was firm enough to crack walnuts, and her eyes had that sharp, calculating look that made me understand why opposing counsel probably broke out in cold sweats when they saw her name on court documents. Her office was on the 32nd floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Denver skyline and the mountains beyond. It was the kind of view that reminded you that there were bigger things in the world than your personal problems, while simultaneously making it clear that the person behind the desk had the kind of success that could afford such reminders. The walls were lined with law books, framed diplomas from schools with names that made your student loans weep, and photographs of Patricia with various judges and politicians who looked like they could have disappeared if you annoyed them sufficiently. "Mr. Ellison," she said, gesturing for me to take a seat in one of the leather chairs positioned across from her massive mahogany desk. "I understand you're interested in exploring an annulment. That's an unusual request for someone who's been married for only a few months. Why don't you tell me what's going on?" So, I did. I told her everything, starting with that magical first meeting at the charity gala and ending with my late-night research session that had led me to her office. I laid out the timeline of Clara's personality transformation, the complete lack of intimacy, the mysterious phone calls and unexplained absences, the way she seemed to actively avoid being alone with me in our own house. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting down notes on a legal pad with handwriting that looked like it had been designed by someone who charged extra for legibility. When I finished my tale of marital woe, she leaned back in her chair and studied me with the kind of expression that made me feel like I was being x-rayed by someone who could see through at the molecular level. The silence stretched on long enough that I started to wonder if maybe I'd misread the situation. If maybe my problems were just normal married life stuff that everyone goes through and I was being a dramatic baby who couldn't handle the adjustment period. Then she leaned forward, placed her hands flat on the desk, and said something that changed everything. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made Supreme Court justices sit up and pay attention. "This isn't just grounds for annulment. If your wife entered into this marriage under false pretenses, if she never intended to fulfill the basic obligations of marriage, then what you're describing is fraud. And if we can prove that she planned this deception from the beginning, you're not just looking at civil implications. You're looking at potential criminal charges." The word fraud hit me like a physical blow. I'd suspected something was wrong, obviously. But hearing it laid out in legal terms by someone whose job was to understand these things made it real in a way that my late-night internet research sessions hadn't quite managed. This wasn't just about a marriage that wasn't working out. This was about deliberate deception, about someone who had essentially run a con game on me using wedding vows and romantic dinners as cover. "Criminal charges?" I asked, my voice sounding smaller than I would have liked. "You mean like actual jail time?" Patricia nodded grimly, pulling out a thick file folder that she'd apparently prepared while I was telling my story. "Marriage fraud is a serious offense in Colorado, especially when significant financial assets are involved. If Clara married you with the intention of gaining access to your wealth and property without ever planning to fulfill her marital obligations, that constitutes fraud under state law. The fact that she insisted on a prenuptial agreement could actually work in our favor here. It suggests premeditation, advanced planning for the dissolution of the marriage." She opened the file and started pulling out documents, case precedents, legal statutes, examples of similar situations that had resulted in both annulments and criminal convictions. "There's a pattern here that I've seen before, Marcus. The whirlwind courtship designed to prevent you from getting to know the real person. The immediate personality change after the wedding, the avoidance of intimacy combined with mysterious behavior and secretiveness. These are classic signs of what we call a marriage con." The term made my stomach clench. A marriage con. Like I was some kind of mark in an elaborate grift. A sucker who'd been played by a professional who specialized in targeting wealthy, lonely men with more money than sense. It was humiliating and enlightening at the same time. Humiliating because it meant I'd been completely fooled by someone I thought I loved, but enlightening because it meant that what had happened to me wasn't my fault. "What do we need to prove it?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the fact that my entire worldview was currently being reconstructed in real time. Patricia smiled, and it wasn't a particularly pleasant expression. It was the kind of smile that made me very glad she was on my side instead of working for the opposition. "We need evidence of premeditation and deception, phone records, financial documents, witness testimony about her behavior before and after the marriage. We need to establish that this was a planned deception rather than just a marriage that went south." She leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers in a way that made her look like she was already planning her opening argument. "The good news is that people who run marriage cons usually aren't as careful about covering their tracks as they think they are. They get overconfident, sloppy. They assume their victims won't fight back, that they'll just accept the situation and move on quietly." "And the bad news?" I asked, though I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to hear the answer. "The bad news is that this is going to get ugly. If Clara is running a con, she's not going to go quietly when we expose her. She'll fight back, probably with accusations designed to make you look like the bad guy. Marriage fraud cases are nasty, public, and emotionally brutal for everyone involved." Patricia stood up and walked over to the windows, looking out at the city spread below us like she was surveying a battlefield where she was about to deploy her troops. "But here's what I can promise you, Marcus. If your wife is a fraud, if she married you under false pretenses with the intention of taking advantage of you financially and emotionally, then we're going to expose her. We're going to make sure that everyone knows exactly what she is and what she's done. And we're going to make sure that she pays for it, both civilly and criminally. She turned back to face me. And the expression on her face was the kind that had probably made grown men weep in courtrooms across Colorado. The question is, are you ready for that kind of fight? Because once we start down this road, there's no going back. This isn't just about ending your marriage anymore. This is about justice. I thought about Clara's cold laughter, about the way she looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd found on her shoe, about the months of confusion and self-doubt and wondering what the hell was wrong with me that my own wife couldn't stand to be in the same room with me. I thought about the beautiful, affectionate woman who had apparently never existed except as a carefully constructed facade designed to get me to the altar. Yeah, I said, meeting Patricia's eyes with a steadiness that surprised me. I'm ready. You know how in those old detective movies, the private investigator is always some gruff chain-smoking guy in a wrinkled coat who operates out of an office that looks like it hasn't been cleaned since the Eisenhower administration. Well, Detective Samuel Torres was nothing like that, which was either really reassuring or deeply disappointing depending on how much you buy into Hollywood stereotypes. Instead of looking like he'd stepped out of a film noir, Torres looked like he could have been modeling for Men's Health magazine mid-40s, built like he spent serious time in the gym, wearing a suit that actually fit him properly and had been pressed sometime in the current decade. His office, located in a professional building about 10 minutes from Patricia's downtown high-rise, was clean, modern, and organized in a way that suggested someone who took their job seriously instead of someone who survived on bourbon and cigarettes while brooding about the darkness of the human condition. The walls were covered with framed certificates and commendations from his time as a Denver police detective, along with testimonials from grateful clients who'd obviously been happy enough with his work to put their names on his wall for other potential customers to see. Patricia had made the introduction with her typical efficiency, calling Torres while I was still sitting in her office and setting up a meeting for the next day. Sam's the best investigator in Colorado, she told me as she hung up the phone. He used to work fraud cases for Denver PD before he went private. If anyone can dig up dirt on your wife, it's him. And trust me, Marcus, if there's dirt to be found, we need to find it before she has a chance to cover her tracks. Torres greeted me with a handshake that was firm without being a macho pissing contest. Offered me coffee that was actually decent instead of the battery acid most offices served and got straight to business in a way that made me understand why Patricia recommended him so highly. He had this way of listening that made you feel like every word you said was being filed away in some kind of mental database that he could access instantly whenever he needed it. Mr. Ellison, he said, settling behind his desk with a digital recorder and a yellow legal pad that looked suspiciously similar to the one Patricia had used. Miss Henley filled me in on the basics of your situation, but I'd like to hear it from you directly. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out, no matter how insignificant it might seem. In fraud cases, the devil is always in the details. So, I went through the whole sorry tale again from that first magical meeting at the charity gala to my recent epiphany about marriage law and potential criminal charges. Torres listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting down notes or asking clarifying questions that showed he was paying attention to things I hadn't even realized were important. When did Clara first suggest the prenup? How quickly did she want to set the wedding date? Did she ever ask specific questions about my financial situation that seemed unusual at the time? When I finished, Torres leaned back in his chair and studied me with the kind of expression that made me feel like I was being evaluated by someone who'd seen every possible variation of human deception and wasn't particularly surprised by any of it anymore. The silence stretched on long enough that I started to wonder if maybe my story wasn't as compelling as I'd thought. If maybe I was just another bitter husband who couldn't accept that his marriage wasn't working out. Then Torres leaned forward, his eyes narrowing in a way that made me understand why criminals probably confess to him just to make him stop looking at them like that. I've seen this pattern before, he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd investigated too many cases that started exactly like mine. Quick courtship, lavish wedding, immediate personality change, avoidance of intimacy, mysterious behavior. It's textbook marriage fraud. Marcus, the only question is whether your wife is working alone or if she's part of something bigger. The phrase something bigger sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in his office. What do you mean something bigger? Torres opened a file drawer and pulled out a thick folder that looked like it contained enough paperwork to choke a horse. Marriage fraud isn't usually a solo operation. There are organized groups that specialize in this kind of con. They identify targets, research their backgrounds, train the operators, provide backup and support during the operation. If Clara is part of one of these groups, she's not just some woman who decided to scam a wealthy husband for kicks. She's a professional. He opened the folder and started pulling out photographs, documents, what looked like surveillance reports. I've been tracking a particular network that's been operating in Colorado, Utah, and Nevada for the past few years. They target wealthy, recently divorced or never married men in their 30s and 40s. The pattern is always the same. Whirlwind romance, quick engagement, expensive wedding, then immediate withdrawal and eventual financial settlement through divorce or annulment. Torres spread the documents across his desk like he was laying out evidence at a crime scene. The thing is, these people are good at what they do. They're trained to be exactly what their targets are looking for. They study their marks, learn their interests and preferences, become the perfect woman for that specific man. It's not random. It's targeted, professional, and extremely effective. I stared at the photographs scattered across his desk. Pictures of women who could have been Clara's sisters. All beautiful, all polished, all photographed in what looked like surveillance shots taken from a distance. Are you saying Clara might be part of some kind of marriage fraud ring? I'm saying it's a possibility we need to investigate, Torres replied, gathering up the photographs and tucking them back into the folder. But first, I need to gather evidence about Clara specifically. I need to know where she goes during those mysterious absences, who she's talking to on that phone she guards so carefully, whether she's had contact with anyone who might be coaching her or helping her plan this con. Torres reached into his desk drawer and pulled out what looked like a small black device about the size of a smartphone. This is a digital recorder with voice activation. It's completely legal to record conversations in your own home in Colorado as long as you're a party to the conversation. I want you to keep this with you whenever you're talking to Clara. If she slips up, if she says anything that reveals her real intentions or mentions other people who might be involved, we need to have proof. The weight of the device in my hands was surprisingly heavy, like I was holding evidence of my own naivety and stupidity. You really think she might confess to running a con on me? Torres smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the kind of smile that suggested he'd seen people underestimate his investigative skills before and had enjoyed proving them wrong. Criminals get overconfident, Marcus. They start to believe their own cover stories or they get careless because they think their victims are too stupid or too emotionally invested to fight back. Clara married you because she thought you were an easy mark, wealthy, trusting, probably a little lonely, and eager to please. She's not expecting you to fight back with lawyers and private investigators. He stood up and walked over to a filing cabinet, pulling out what looked like a standard contract. I'm going to do a complete background check on Clara, employment history, previous addresses, financial records, social media activity, the works. I'm also going to put surveillance on her during those mysterious absences of hers. If she's meeting with accomplices or conducting other business related to this con, I'll find out about it. Torres returned to his desk and slid the contract across to me. My rate is $500 a day plus expenses. For a case like this, figure on at least 2 weeks of investigation, maybe more if we uncover evidence of a larger operation. Patricia tells me money isn't an object, but I want you to understand what you're signing up for here. I looked at the contract, thinking about what $500 a day times 2 weeks would cost, then thinking about what it had cost me emotionally to spend the last few months wondering what the hell was wrong with me that my own wife couldn't stand to be in the same room with me. Money is not an object, I confirmed, signing my name with the kind of flourish that suggested I was finally taking control of my own life instead of just letting things happen to me. Torres countered-signed the contract and filed it away in what I assumed was his active cases drawer. One more thing, Marcus, from this point forward, you can't let Clara know that you suspect anything. You need to act like the confused, hurt husband who's still hoping things will get better. If she realizes we're investigating her, she'll either disappear or start covering her tracks in ways that will make our job a lot harder. As I left Torres's office with a recording device in my pocket and a private investigator on my payroll, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not hope that my marriage could be saved because that ship had sailed somewhere around the time Clara started treating me like I was a registered sex offender, but hope that I might finally get some answers. Hope that I might discover I wasn't crazy or inadequate or fundamentally unlovable, but just the victim of someone who was really, really good at what they did for a living. That night, sitting in my living room while Clara chatted on her phone behind the closed door of what used to be our bedroom, I activated the recording device Torres had given me and waited for my wife to make her first mistake. If you've ever watched a magician perform and then had someone explain exactly how the trick works, you know that moment when the illusion collapses and you can't believe you were stupid enough to fall for something so obvious. That's exactly how I felt when Detective Torres called me 3 days later with information that made my entire marriage look like a masterclass in elaborate deception. Except instead of pulling rabbits out of hats, Clara had been pulling the wool over my eyes while systematically planning to destroy my life. I was sitting in my office pretending to review quarterly reports while actually obsessing over every interaction I'd had with Clara in the past week when Torres' call came through. I'd been carrying that recording device everywhere, waiting for her to slip up and say something incriminating, but so far all I'd captured was her end of boring conversations about yoga classes and dinner plans that sounded suspiciously fabricated. She was being careful, probably more careful than usual, which made me wonder if she'd somehow sensed that something had changed in the dynamic between us. "Marcus," Torres said without preamble, his voice carrying that particular tone that investigators use when they're about to deliver news that's going to ruin someone's day. "We need to meet. I've got information about Clara that you need to see in person. Can you get away from the office this afternoon?" The urgency in his voice made my stomach clench with a combination of anticipation and dread. Part of me had been hoping that Torres would call back and tell me I was being paranoid, that Clara was just a woman going through a rough patch in her marriage and not some kind of professional con artist. But the way he sounded suggested that my worst suspicions were about to be confirmed in ways I probably wasn't prepared for. An hour later, I was back in Torres's office watching him spread documents across his desk like he was laying out evidence at a crime scene. Except this time, the crime scene was my life, and I was apparently both the victim and the last person to figure out what had been happening right under my nose. "Okay," Marcus Torres said, settling into his chair with the kind of expression that made me want to pour myself a stiff drink, even though it wasn't even 3 o'clock in the afternoon. "I'm going to give this to you straight, and it's not going to be pleasant. Your wife isn't just avoiding intimacy with you. She's been living a completely separate life that she's been very careful to keep hidden." He picked up what looked like an official document with several stamps and seals on it. "Let's start with the big one. Clara Whitmore was married before to a man named David Sterling in Las Vegas, Nevada in 2019. According to Nevada state records, that marriage was never legally dissolved. Their divorce proceedings were initiated but never finalized, which means that technically Clara was still married to another man when she married you." The words hit me like a physical blow. Bigamy. My wife was a bigamist. Not just a cold, enough spouse, but someone who had committed an actual crime by marrying me while still legally married to someone else. I sat there staring at the marriage certificate Torres had somehow obtained, trying to process the fact that my entire wedding had been not just a sham, but literally illegal. "It gets worse," Torres continued, pulling out another set of documents. David Sterling filed a police report in Nevada 6 months after Clara left him, claiming that she had defrauded him out of nearly $200,000 through forged checks and unauthorized credit card charges. The case was never prosecuted because Clara had disappeared and they couldn't locate her. But the report is still on file. I felt like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. Some thriller where the protagonist discovers that his perfect wife is actually a sociopathic criminal who specializes in destroying men's lives for profit. Except this wasn't a movie, and the devastated husband staring at evidence of his wife's crimes was me. "There's more," Torres said, though I wasn't sure how much more I could handle without my brain completely short-circuiting. "I've been conducting surveillance on Clara during her mysterious absences, and she's been meeting regularly with a man named Lucas Crane. Crane has a record. He's been arrested twice for marriage fraud, though he was only convicted once. He served 18 months in a Colorado state prison for running a romance scam that built 3 different women out of a combined total of $500,000. Torres pulled out surveillance photographs that showed Clara sitting in what looked like an upscale coffee shop with a man who appeared to be in his 50s, well-dressed, the kind of guy who could probably charm his way into your bank account while you thanked him for the privilege. They were leaning in close, talking intently, and Clara's body language was completely different from anything I'd seen from her in months. She looked engaged, animated, alive in a way that she never looked when she was with me. Based on these meetings and some financial records I was able to obtain, it appears that Clara and Crane have been working together to identify and target wealthy men for marriage fraud schemes. You're not her first victim, Marcus. And if we hadn't started investigating when we did, you probably wouldn't have been her last. The room started to feel like it was spinning slightly, and I had to grip the arms of my chair to keep myself anchored to reality. Everything I thought I knew about my wife, about our relationship, about myself was collapsing faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. The woman I'd fallen in love with. The woman I'd married in front of 200 guests in the most beautiful ceremony I could afford had never existed except as a carefully constructed facade designed to separate me from my money. The really sick part, Torres continued, seemingly oblivious to the fact that I was having what might have been a minor psychological breakdown, is how professional this operation is. They researched their targets extensively, your business, your family background, your interests, your previous relationships. Clara became exactly the kind of woman you'd fall for based on information they gathered about you beforehand. He pulled out what looked like a dossier with my name on it filled with details about my life that I'd never shared with Clara directly. My college major, my hobbies, my mother's name, even details about my previous girlfriend and why we'd broken up. It was like reading an FBI file on myself, except it had been compiled by criminals who were using the information to destroy my life. How did they get all this? I asked, my voice sounding strange and distant even to my own ears. Social media, public records, mutual acquaintances who didn't realize they were being pumped for information, Torres explained. It's surprisingly easy to build a comprehensive profile on someone if you know what you're looking for and you're willing to put in the time. That's when he dropped the final bombshell, the piece of evidence that transformed my confused hurt into something approaching pure rage. He reached over to his computer and pressed play on an audio file that filled the room with the sound of Clara's voice. Except she didn't sound anything like the woman I'd been living with for the past few months. Her voice was warm, affectionate, intimate in a way that made my chest tight with recognition and fury. "Don't worry, baby," she was saying to someone who definitely wasn't me. "I'll be free soon. The plan is working perfectly. Marcus is so confused and desperate that he's not even questioning why I won't sleep with him anymore. Once we file for the annulment, I'll get access to the settlement money we negotiated in the prenup and then we can disappear together like we planned." The voice that responded was male, presumably Lucas Crane, and he sounded pleased with her progress. "You're sure he won't fight the annulment? He seemed pretty smitten during the surveillance we did before the wedding." Clara's laugh was the same musical sound that had first attracted me at that charity gala, except now it sounded like nails on a chalkboard. "Marcus is a sweet, naive man who thinks love conquers all. He'll be so relieved to get out of this marriage that he won't question the financial arrangements. Besides, he's too much of a gentleman to drag me through a nasty divorce. He'll take whatever deal we offer him just to make the whole thing go away quietly." I sat there listening to my wife discuss my emotional destruction like it was a business transaction, feeling something inside me die and get replaced by something much colder and infinitely more dangerous. The woman I'd love, the woman I'd married, the woman I'd been torturing myself trying to understand and please, had never existed. She was a character in an elaborate play, and I'd been the unwitting audience member who'd somehow ended up on stage without realizing the performance had started. Marcus Torres was looking at me with what might have been concern, though it was hard to tell through the red haze that had descended over my vision. "Are you okay?" I looked at him and felt my face arrange itself into what I hoped was a smile, though it probably looked more like a snarl. "I'm perfect," I said, and meant it. Because for the first time in months, I understood exactly what was happening and exactly what I needed to do about it. Clara thought she was running a con on a naive, lovesick fool who would roll over and play dead when she was ready to cash out. What she didn't realize was that she just handed me everything I needed to destroy her completely. And I was more than ready to return the favor. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, let me tell you. After sitting in Patricia's office listening to her explain our strategy for destroying Clara's little con game, I was feeling downright arctic. This wasn't going to be some messy emotional confrontation where I screamed about betrayal and threw her designer clothes out onto the lawn like some reality TV drama. No, this was going to be surgical, calculated, and absolutely devastating in all the best ways. Patricia had crafted our approach with the kind of precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker jealous. We were going to let Clara think she was winning right up until the moment we pulled the rug out from under her perfectly pedicured feet. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. We'd file for annulment exactly like she expected, making it look like I was too heartbroken and confused to fight for anything more than a quick, quiet escape from our disaster of a marriage. The key, Patricia explained while spreading legal documents across her conference table like she was planning a military invasion, is to make Clara believe she's gotten exactly what she wanted. She thinks you're a pushover who'll accept whatever terms she dictates just to make the pain stop. We're going to encourage that belief right up until we spring the fraud evidence on her in court. The prenuptial agreement that Clara had insisted on, which at the time I'd thought was just her being practical about protecting her family's money, was about to become the rope she'd unknowingly fashioned for her own legal hanging. She'd negotiated terms that would give her a substantial settlement in case of annulment. Clearly believing that a sad, desperate Marcus would just hand over the cash to make his embarrassing marriage disappear quietly. What she didn't know was that fraud invalidates contracts. Every single clause she'd so carefully negotiated, every financial protection she'd built into our agreement would become worthless toilet paper the moment we proved she'd entered the marriage under false pretenses. Instead of walking away with a nice chunk of my assets, she'd be walking away in handcuffs. For the next 2 weeks, I played my part like I was auditioning for an Oscar. I moped around the house, acted defeated and confused, made it clear that I just wanted our nightmare marriage to end as quietly as possible. When Clara suggested we discuss our options, which was apparently Connor to speak for, "Let me explain how much money you're going to give me to go away," I nodded sadly and agreed that maybe it would be best for both of us. Clara's smugness during those conversations was almost impressive in its complete lack of self-awareness. She'd pat my hand sympathetically while explaining how much better we'd both be once we moved on from this mistake, completely oblivious to the fact that I was recording every word and that her idea of moving on was about to collide head first with multiple felony charges. "You'll regret losing me someday, Marcus," she told me one evening, her voice dripping with fake sympathy that made my skin crawl. "But I think we both know this marriage was doomed from the start. Some people just aren't compatible, no matter how much they want to be." If I hadn't known she was basically reading from a script designed to manipulate me into accepting financial ruin, I might have actually felt guilty about what was coming next. But sitting there listening to her perform her concerned wife routine while knowing she was planning to disappear with Lucas Crane the moment she got her hands on my money, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The legal system was about to give Clara Whitmore the education of her lifetime, and I was going to have front row seats to watch her discover that some marks fight back harder than expected. The day of the hearing, Clara walked into that Denver courtroom like she was stepping onto a red carpet at some fancy award show. She'd chosen her outfit carefully. A conservative navy suit that screamed respectable wife who's been wronged. Paired with just enough jewelry to remind everyone that she came from money, but not so much that she looked greedy. Her lawyer, some slick operator she'd hired with what I assumed was her family's money, looked equally confident as they took their seats across from Patricia and me. I have to admit, watching Clara perform her grieving wife routine was almost impressive. When her attorney argued that I was just an impatient husband who couldn't respect her boundaries, she managed to look appropriately wounded, like she was the victim of some terrible misunderstanding rather than a career criminal who'd made the mistake of targeting the wrong mark. Then Patricia stood up and the temperature in the room seemed to drop about 20 degrees. She walked to the evidence table with the kind of calm confidence that made everyone pay attention, including the judge, who looked like he'd seen enough divorce drama to fill several seasons of daytime television, but was suddenly interested in what was about to unfold. "Your Honor," Patricia began, her voice carrying across the courtroom like she was delivering a sermon to the faithful. "We have evidence that Mrs. Whitmore entered this marriage under fraudulent circumstances." She pressed play on the audio device and Clara's voice filled the courtroom warm and intimate as she discussed her plans to be free soon and access the settlement money we negotiated. I watched Clara's face as she heard her own words played back to her. Saw the exact moment when her carefully constructed composure cracked like ice on a frozen pond. The color drained from her cheeks. Her mouth opened slightly in what might have been shock or horror. And for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely afraid. But Patricia wasn't done. She revealed the Nevada marriage license, the evidence of Clara's previous fraud conviction, the surveillance photos of her meetings with Lucas Crane. Each piece of evidence hit Clara like a physical blow, and I could see her lawyer frantically scribbling notes while probably calculating how quickly he could distance himself from this disaster. The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps as Patricia laid out the full scope of Clara's deception. The judge's face hardened with each revelation, his expression shifting from mild interest to complete disgust as he realized the extent of the fraud that had been perpetrated in his jurisdiction. "Mrs. Whitmore," Judge Harrison said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. "It appears you entered this marriage under fraudulent circumstances. This court not only grants the annulment, but refers your case for criminal review." For the first time since I'd known her, I saw the real Clara. Not the charming socialite or the cold manipulator, but a frightened woman who just realized her entire world was about to collapse. The annulment was finalized faster than Clara could say criminal defense attorney. Within a week, the woman who'd walked into that courtroom expecting to collect a nice settlement check was instead facing charges of fraud, bigamy, and conspiracy. The Whitmore family, who'd spent a fortune on our wedding to show off their social status, suddenly found themselves scrambling to do damage control as their daughter's mugshot made the rounds on local news and social media. Clara herself went from Denver socialite to cautionary tale overnight. The same charity galas and country club events where she'd once held court now whispered about her behind closed doors. And her carefully curated Instagram account disappeared faster than free samples at Costco. Lucas Crane, her partner in crime, was arrested 2 days after the hearing when police tracked him down at a motel outside Boulder, apparently waiting for Clara to show up with money that was never going to materialize. As for me, I walked out of that courthouse feeling like I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. My friends, the real ones like Adrian, celebrated with quiet relief, while my mother actually smiled for the first time since the wedding. "I knew something was wrong with that girl," she said, though she was kind enough not to add, "I told you so." The most shocking thing wasn't how quickly Clara's empire of lies collapsed once the truth came out. It was how strong I'd become in the process of fighting back. I'd gone from confused victim to someone who dismantled a professional con operation. And honestly, that felt better than any marriage ever could have. Clara had taught me an expensive but valuable lesson. Sometimes the person you think you love is just a mirror showing you what you want to see. The real victory wasn't just getting my freedom back. It was learning that I was a hell of a lot tougher than either of us had given me credit for.
That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the stories. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.